What if the ocean didn't just take, but remembered your name and waited for you to come home? This is the story of Amelia Quinn, a woman who refused to be a sacrifice and chose to become the storm instead. When an ancient sea entity returns to claim her bloodline, Amelia steps beyond survival into open war, rewriting the rules of her family's ancient covenant. It's a tale of blood, salt, defiance, and power, a battle cry echoing across the way. If you think you know the ocean's hunger, think again. I've always believed the ocean had a heartbeat. When I was a kid, I would press my ear to the conch shells my grandmother collected along the rocky shores of Big Sur, convinced I could hear it pulsing under all that roaring salt water. My grandmother Iris would laugh and say, "That's not the ocean, child. That's your own heart echoing back at you. The sea knows you better than you think." I never quite understood her then, but tonight, standing barefoot on the frigid sand at Harborfield, with the moon glaring down like a judgmental eye, I feel every single word she ever said echoing in my bones. I came to this windswept town thinking I could outrun my failures. At 26, my life felt like one long string of cheap apartments and half-finished goodbyes. My art degree had turned into a dusty certificate no one cared to frame, and my bartending gigs barely covered rent, let alone the medical bills for the therapy sessions I always skipped. I thought if I kept moving, nothing would catch up to me. Turns out the sea is patient, and it always collects. When my car sputtered its last breath just outside Harborfield last week, I took it as a cosmic middle finger. The mechanic at the local garage, a man with cigarette-yellowed fingers and shark tattoos all the way up his neck, looked at me and said, "Transmission's toast. Might as well push it into the ocean, darlin'." That night, I walked the town's deserted streets, past shuttered surf shops and faded murals of dolphins leaping into perfect skies. It felt like a town in permanent low tide. Everything exposed, everything vulnerable. I was halfway through crying into a to-go cup of stale gas station coffee when I saw it. A neon sign flickering in the fog. Coastline Cafe. 3 words, bright blue, humming like a siren. I don't know what made me cross the road that night. Maybe it was the warmth that oozed out from the fog-drenched windows. Maybe it was the way the sign looked like a lighthouse in a storm. Maybe I just wanted to feel less alone. The moment I pushed open that door, it was like stepping into another world. Inside, the air smelled of fresh brewed coffee and something else. Something deeper, older, a briny scent like kelp tangled in driftwood. The walls were lined with framed photographs, fishermen grinning with their catch, sun-bleached family portraits, snapshots of beach bonfires that looked like they belonged to a different century. Behind the counter stood a woman who looked like she had been waiting for me her entire life. "Mara," she introduced herself with a voice like warm bourbon, smooth but with a slow burn underneath. Her silver hair was coiled into a thick braid that reminded me of ocean ropes, and her eyes had a depth that made you feel like you were falling inward. "Welcome to Coastline Cafe, Amelia," she said, as if she had read my name from a dream. I didn't even remember telling her who I was. Mara offered me a job without hesitation, night shifts mostly. Not many applicants make it through a whole night here, but you look different. She paused, studying me like a fisherman deciding if the catch was worth keeping. I tried to laugh it off. Desperate and broke? That kind of different? She didn't smile, just handed me a small laminated card that said, "Rules for night staff." The list was bizarre. No greeting customers with "good evening" or "good morning." Serve everyone without asking names. Always keep the coffee hot. Never follow anyone out to the parking lot no matter what they claim to have forgotten. I thought it was a gimmick, some local theater act, or maybe a twisted sense of humor. But something in Mara's gaze told me otherwise. I started that night. Tonight. The coastal fog had rolled in thick as milk, curling around the cafe's porch like the fingers of something alive. The neon sign buzzed above me, casting a cold blue glow that made the beach look even lonelier. My heartbeat matched the tempo of the crashing waves somewhere beyond the darkness. I stood in front of the counter, wiping down a coffee pot for the 50th time. trying to ignore how my reflection kept flickering in the stainless steel surface, warping, stretching, like someone else was standing just behind me. The first customer of the night shuffled in at exactly 11:47 p.m. He wore an old yellow rain jacket, the kind you see on lighthouse keepers in grainy black and white photos. He trod in puddles of seawater, even though I hadn't heard any rain. "Welcome to Coastline Cafe," I forced out, remembering the rule about never acknowledging time. "What can I get for you tonight?" He didn't answer immediately. He just stared at me with eyes so pale they looked bleached by salt. Slowly, he raised a hand and pointed at the menu. His fingernails were black and curling. "Just coffee," he rasped, his voice echoing like it came from a deep-sea trench. I filled a cup, my hands trembling so badly I almost spilled it. When I set it on the counter, he nodded once and shuffled to a booth by the window. He sat there, unmoving, staring out into the fog. Every few minutes, he brought the cup to his lips, but I never saw him drink. Other customers trickled in, a teenage girl in a prom dress soaked to the bone, sequins shimmering under the harsh overhead lights. A man in a Coast Guard uniform, his skin pale and pocked as though eaten by barnacles. An elderly woman with a sun hat, her bare feet covered in sand and seaweed. Each one ordered coffee. Each one sat in silence. Each one seemed to fade at the edges, like watercolors in the rain. I felt the panic building in my throat like a wave about to break. My fingers itched to grab my phone, to call someone, anyone, but there was no signal. There never was, not in Harborfield. I remembered the last line on Mara's card. "Whatever you see, serve them. You're safer inside than outside." I looked at the clock above the pie display. 12:30 IMM. Still so many hours to go before dawn. Through the window, something moved. A figure, impossibly tall and thin, standing on the beach where the waves kissed the sand. The fog parted around it as though afraid to touch. Its arms were too long, swaying like sea kelp under a current. I pressed a hand against the glass, drawn to it despite every instinct in my body screaming to run. The figure turned its head slowly, if it even had a head, and I swore I felt its gaze pierce through me, straight into that echoing heartbeat my grandmother had warned me about. That was when I knew. The ocean wasn't just calling me. It had been waiting, and tonight, it wanted something back. I don't remember unlocking the back door. One moment, I was frozen by that tall figure on the beach, its arms undulating like they were made of fog and seaweed. The next, I was standing in the cramped staff hallway, staring at a row of hooks holding rain-soaked coats that no one ever wore, my breath coming in shallow bursts. Mara found me there. She moved so silently that it felt like she slid into the room rather than walked. Her eyes glimmered in the dim fluorescent light, reflections dancing like tiny lighthouses in the storm. "You saw it, didn't you?" she asked softly. I could only nod. My throat had closed up so tightly it felt like my own voice had been washed away in the tide. Mara sighed. The sound was heavy, like the final crash of a wave before it dissolves into foam. "Come," she said, motioning toward a narrow staircase leading down to a basement I hadn't known existed. The air changed as soon as I stepped onto the first stair. It smelled of brine and copper, of old secrets and forgotten promises. The walls were lined with jagged stones, crusted with salt crystals, glimmering like tiny stars in the darkness. At the bottom of the stairs, a single lantern flickered, throwing shadows across an ancient table carved with symbols I didn't recognize. Circles intersecting lines, a serpent biting its own tail, runes that looked like twisted fishhooks. Mara leaned over the table, her fingers tracing the carvings like she was reading Braille. "This cafe isn't just a diner," she began, her voice trembling as if the words themselves could drag her under. "It's a seal, a barrier, a lighthouse for lost souls who wander too close to the waves." I stared at her, my head pounding with 1,000 unasked questions. "Why me?" I finally managed, my voice cracking. "Why did you hire me? Why am I seeing that thing?" She turned, and for the first time since I met her, Mara looked small. fragile, like driftwood left too long in the sun. "Because you are Quinn blood," she said. "Your grandmother wasn't just a shell collector. Iris knew the sea better than any of us. She was a keeper, the last of them." My knees buckled. I grabbed the edge of the table to stay upright. "That's impossible," I whispered. "My grandmother, she told stories, but they were just... Stories are how we hide truths," Mara cut in sharply. "Iris believed you would never need to know. But the ocean doesn't forget, Amelia. It keeps debts like shipwrecks at the bottom of a trench." Mara crossed the room and lifted a dusty wooden box from a shelf. She placed it in front of me with reverence, as though it might bite if she moved too quickly. "Open it." My fingers hesitated over the latch. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to bolt back up the stairs and out into the night. But something deeper, a thread spun long before I was born, pulled me forward. The box creaked open. Inside lay a small, perfectly round stone the color of storm clouds, with a hole bored through its center. Around it were thin strands of seaweed, brittle from age, and a lock of silver hair tied with blue twine. The moment I touched the stone, a shock shot through my veins. I gasped, stumbling backward, clutching my chest. My heart felt like it had skipped 1,000 beats and was now struggling to remember how to work. Images flooded my mind in a violent cascade. My grandmother standing on the rocky cliffs in a midnight storm, chanting into the wind. Monstrous shapes rising from the waves, reaching for her with fingers like breaking branches. A blinding light, and then silence. I fell to my knees, sobbing. The taste of salt filled my mouth as if I'd swallowed the entire sea. Mara knelt beside me, her hand heavy on my shoulder. "This is the hex stone," she said. "A key, a weapon, and a promise your grandmother made that night. She offered it to the ocean in place of herself. But it was a temporary appeasement. The sea, it always wants more." I tried to speak, but all that came out was a broken, rasping sound. "You were never meant to be just a wanderer," Mara continued, her voice almost gentle now. "Your blood remembers, even if your mind refuses. And that creature you saw, it's not just a ghost or a monster. It's the collector, the watcher at the deep gates. It comes when the balance is broken, to reclaim what it believes is owed." I looked at her, tears streaming down my cheeks, my hair plastered to my forehead with sweat. "So what does it want from me?" Mara's eyes closed for a moment, as if she was listening to something deep below us, something ancient and slow. "It wants you," she said finally. "Not just your life, but your essence, your will. Your blood is powerful enough to seal the rift, to keep the ocean's nightmares where they belong, but it demands that you offer it willingly." A hollow laugh bubbled up from my chest. It sounded foreign, cracked. "You think I'm just going to walk into the sea and let it take me?" Mara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood and returned to the table, placing the hex stone back into its box with infinite care. "That is your choice," she said, turning to face me again. "But if you refuse, the barrier will shatter. The ocean will spill in, not just as water, but as something much darker. Everything we know will drown." A deep, resonant boom echoed above us. The walls shuddered. Fine white salt dust drifted down from the ceiling like snow. Mara's gaze snapped upward. "It's begun," she murmured. My thoughts spiraled. I saw the people in town. The old couple running the bait shop, the kids riding skateboards past the dunes, the tourists with their bright plastic cameras, faces blurred together into a tidal wave of fragile, blissful ignorance. I staggered to my feet, wiping the tears and salt from my face. "Show me what I need to do," I said. For the first time since I met her, Mara smiled. It was a small, sad smile, but there was a flicker of pride in it too. "Then come upstairs," she said. "We have much to prepare. And you, Amelia Quinn, you were always meant to be the one standing at the shore when the tide finally turns." As we climbed the stairs together, I glanced over my shoulder at the hex stone. now glowing faintly like an ember left in an old campfire. I understood, in that single heartbeat, that I had never truly been lost. I had been adrift, waiting for the current to call me home. Tonight, the sea was calling, and this time I was ready to answer. When we reached the top of the stairs, the air in the cafe had changed. The smell of salt was thicker now, clinging to the walls and tables like mildew in an old shipwreck. The neon sign outside flickered violently, its blue glow flashing across the windows like distant lightning at sea. Mara moved quickly, her hands snatching jars of sea salt, bundles of dried kelp, and strange brass charms from a hidden shelf beneath the counter. She worked with a grim urgency, like a surgeon prepping for a midnight operation. I stood frozen, my body refusing to obey as my mind screamed to run. But there was nowhere to go. The parking lot outside had vanished into an endless swirl of fog so dense it felt like a living thing, breathing just beyond the glass. "You need to set the boundaries," Mara snapped, breaking my trance. She shoved a bundle of dried kelp into my hands. It felt rough and crackled under my fingers, smelling of ocean. To go to each corner of the cafe, place a piece and whisper, "Hold the tide, guard the gate." I hesitated. "Now," she barked. My legs moved on instinct. I darted to the first corner near the window booth where the girl in the prom dress had been sitting earlier that week. The seat was empty now, but a faint shimmer in the cushion suggested something, or someone, had been there only moments before. "Hold the tide, guard the gate," I whispered, my voice barely carrying above the hum of the flickering sign. I repeated it in each corner, by the jukebox that hadn't played a song in years, near the kitchen door with its perpetually sticky handle, and finally, by the old coat rack where a single soaked raincoat hung like a ghost waiting to be claimed. With each corner claimed, the walls seemed to shudder, as though some invisible force was testing their strength. Mara dumped sea salt in a rough circle around the main counter, then stood inside it, chanting under her breath. Her words were a jumble of English and something older, sounds that reminded me of crashing waves and the low groans of whales echoing in the deep. "Get in the circle," she commanded. I stumbled in beside her, my heart slamming against my ribs like a frantic gull against glass. Outside, something scraped against the front door. A wet, deliberate dragging noise, like nails clawing across a wooden deck. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying it would stop, but it only grew louder. Then came the voice. It wasn't human. It was a low guttural moan, rising and falling with the rhythm of the tide. The sound crawled into my skull, clawing at my sanity. "Amelie." I opened my eyes. Mara's face was pale, her lips moving faster now, her eyes rolled so far back that only the whites showed. The voice came again, this time closer, as if it were whispering through the cracks in the walls. "Come outside, child of the waves. Return what was promised." My body lurched forward involuntarily, feet stepping over the salt line before I even realized it. I felt something cold and slick wrapping around my ankle, pulling. My lungs burned as I fought to scream, but all that came out was a strangled gasp. Mara lunged forward, grabbing my wrist and yanking me back into the circle. She held up the hex stone, now hanging from a thick black cord. It pulsed with a sickly, phosphorescent glow, like some deep-sea creature luring prey. The pulling sensation stopped instantly, the slick coldness retreating into the floorboards like a receding wave. Mara's voice dropped to a growl. "Stay inside the circle, or you're as good as drowned already." I collapsed onto the floor, shaking so badly I felt like I might vibrate into dust. My thoughts scattered, each one replaced by that voice echoing through my skull. Mara wrapped the hexstone cord around my wrist. The moment it touched my skin, I felt an electric jolt shoot up my arm and explode behind my eyes. My vision flooded with images. My grandmother standing knee-deep in storm waves, her hair a silver banner in the wind. Creatures rising from the surf with eyes like oil slicks. A doorway made of water, endlessly opening and closing. I screamed, or maybe I only thought I did, because Mara's grip on my arm tightened. "Oh, focus," she barked. "You are Quinn blood. You hold the gate." Somewhere beyond the cafe walls, the scratching began again, but now it was accompanied by something worse. A deep, resonant knocking, like fists pounding on a coffin from the inside. Mara turned her head sharply toward the door, her nostrils flaring. "It's testing us," she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time. "It knows you're here. It knows you're awake." The knocking turned into pounding. Plates rattled off the shelves and shattered on the floor. The windows bowed inward as though the entire ocean were pressing against them, threatening to rush inside and swallow everything whole. "Repeat after me," Mara shouted over the chaos. "I am the shore. I am the line. I am the final breath between worlds. My mouth was too dry to form words. Mara shook me, her fingers digging into my shoulders. "Say it!" "I am the shore," I choked out. "I am the line. I am the final breath between worlds." A boom reverberated through the cafe, so loud I thought my eardrums had ruptured. The lights flared and then went out, plunging us into darkness lit only by the pulsing glow of the hexstone. In that moment of near blindness, I felt it. A presence slithering along the edges of my mind, tasting my memories like salt on the tongue. It found my fears, my heartbreaks, the broken promises I'd made to myself in cheap motel mirrors. It wanted all of it. I doubled over, vomiting bile onto the floor. Mara knelt beside me, chanting again, her voice a thin thread straining to hold back an ocean. Then, as suddenly as it began, the pounding stopped. A hush fell over the cafe. The fog outside stilled, thick and unmoving like a frozen wave. Mara exhaled, long and slow, her forehead pressed to mine. "You survived the first night," she whispered, her voice ragged with relief. But this is only the beginning. The Collector has seen you now. It will come again, and next time, it won't knock." I trembled under her words, feeling a new alien resolve settle into my bones. I had thought my entire life that I was running from failure, from the ocean, from myself. Tonight I realized I had been running towards something all along, and now there was no turning back. The morning after the first night felt like stepping into a world that had already ended. I woke on the diner floor, curled up in a ball beside the shattered remains of coffee mugs and salt jars. My body ached as though I had been dragged through a storm. Every muscle screamed with an ache that felt too deep to belong only to flesh. Mara sat at the counter, her fingers tracing the rim of a chipped mug. She didn't look at me when I sat up. Instead, she kept her eyes on the fog outside, her face pale and unreadable. I tried to stand, but my legs buckled. The floor rushed up to meet me again, and I let out a strangled laugh. I sounded like a broken radio stuck between stations. "You shouldn't be able to move at all," Mara said finally. Her voice was hoarse, almost apologetic. Most would be half mad after a single night with the Collector. "I guess I'm not most people," I croaked, my throat raw. She finally turned her gaze to me. Something flickered behind her eyes. Fear, or maybe pity. I wasn't sure which was worse. "You carry the Quinn blood," she said. "The ocean recognizes it. It craves it." I felt bile rise in my throat, a sour taste of sea salt and regret. "Why me?" I rasped. "Why not someone stronger, someone who wants this?" Myra let out a sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a laugh. "No one wants this, Amelia. The sea doesn't choose who is willing, it chooses who is bound." I closed my eyes. Images from the night before crashing over me like waves on rocks. The endless pounding at the walls, the cold, slick grip on my ankle, the taste of brine choking me from within. I forced myself to stand again, using the counter as a crutch. My fingers slid over the salt lines Mara had drawn, now smeared and broken from the struggle. "How long before it comes back?" I asked. Mara's lips pressed into a thin line. She looked older in the pale morning light, every wrinkle and sunspot a record of 1,000 storms weathered alone. "Tonight," she said. "Maybe sooner." A shiver shot down my spine. "Why does it wait?" "Because it's patient," she replied. "Because it wants you to fear every second you're not under its grasp. The Collector doesn't simply devour, It consumes hope, sanity, memory. It wants you to give yourself willingly. I turned toward the front window. Outside, the world looked deceptively normal. Seagulls circled above the dunes, their cries thin and sharp against the gray sky. The parking lot shimmered with leftover rainwater. A breeze carried the smell of burning driftwood from somewhere down the coast. But under it all, there was something else. A slow, rhythmic pull at the edge of my mind, like the undertow tugging at your ankles when you stand too close to the surf. A call. I leaned my forehead against the glass, searching the waves for a shape, a sign, anything to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. And then I saw it. Just beyond the break line, where the deep water swallowed light, something rose. At first, it looked like a dark swell, a shifting shadow beneath the surface, but then it moved against the current, coiling upward in slow, deliberate spirals. It was a hand, a massive, impossibly long hand, fingers like strands of seaweed reaching for the sky before sinking back into the depths. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering so violently it felt like it might shatter my ribs. Mara rushed forward, grabbing my arms to steady me. "You saw it," she whispered, her breath hot against my ear. That was real?" I stammered. She nodded once, grim. "The collector shows itself to you now because you are the final key. It's no longer content to wait in the deep. It knows your bloodline has the power to close it out forever or open the way completely." My mouth went dry. "Close it? Forever?" She glanced over her shoulder, as if making sure no one else could hear, even though we were alone. "There is a ritual," Mara said. "A sealing rite passed down through the Quinn line. Your grandmother used it to hold the collector at bay, but it weakened over time. That's why you were drawn here. Why the ocean pushed you into Harborfield." I felt a sudden stab of betrayal, sharp and sour. "My grandmother lied to me," I spat. "She let me grow up thinking I was normal, let me think the ocean was just beautiful." Mara's grip tightened. "She did what she had to do to keep you safe. She hoped you'd never have to know this world." A choked laugh burst from my lips. "Well, she failed." For a moment, the room felt impossibly still. Then Mara released my arms and stepped back, her eyes softening. "She didn't fail," she said. "You are here, you are alive, and you have a choice." "Choice?" I scoffed. "What choice? Sacrifice myself or let the entire coast drown?" Mara didn't answer. Instead, she handed me the hexstone, now wrapped in a fresh coil of kelp and shimmering faintly in the weak daylight. I held it at arm's length, the stone pulsing like a living heart. The instant I touched it, I felt a surge of something ancient and endless rush through me, like I had stuck my fingers into an electric socket connected to the moon and the tides. Images exploded behind my eyes again. My grandmother standing on that cliff, her face streaked with rain and tears, the collector's enormous hands reaching for her. A burst of white light as she raised the hexstone toward the sky. I dropped to my knees, gasping. Mara crouched in front of me. "Tonight we prepare. You can choose to seal it, forever closing the gate and tying yourself here as its final guardian, or you can refuse and let the sea swallow this world." I stared at her through a haze of tears. "Why me?" I whispered again, smaller this time. She reached out, brushing a damp strand of hair from my forehead like a mother might comfort a feverish child. "Because you are the only one who can," she said softly. "And because, deep down, you have always heard the call." Outside, the fog rolled in again, thick and heavy as a burial shroud. I pressed my forehead to the cold hexstone, feeling its pulse echo against mine. Somewhere beyond the waves, something was waiting, and tonight, it would come knocking. By nightfall, the cafe felt like a trap waiting to spring. Mara moved with the precision of a surgeon, her hands never still. She laid out lines of sea salt along every doorway and window frame, her mouth muttering a constant low chant that felt like it was vibrating in my bones. I stood in the middle of the dining area, clutching the hexstone against my chest like a child hugging a favorite toy during a storm. Each pulse of the stone felt stronger than before, thrumming through my skin and down into my bones, as though it were trying to fuse with me. Outside, the fog had thickened into a wall. The neon sign above the entrance flickered and died, leaving us cocooned in darkness that pressed tight against the glass. The world beyond had disappeared. It felt as if we were floating in a black ocean, waiting for the first wave to crash over us. "Focus, Amelia," Mara barked from behind the counter. "We don't have much time." My mind was fracturing under the weight of too many thoughts. Visions of my grandmother screaming at the sea, the hand in the waves, the dead-side customers that still haunted my nightmares. My knees wobbled, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. Mara slammed a heavy iron bowl onto the counter. The clang snapped me back into my body like a slap across the face. "Get over here," she ordered. I obeyed, my feet heavy as anchors. When I reached her, she handed me a small, curved knife with a handle wrapped in black kelp. Its blade shimmered under the dim emergency light, a wicked gleam like moonlight on water. "Cut your palm," she said, her voice firm but trembling at the edges. I stared at the knife, then at her. "You want me to what?" "Your blood is the final ingredient," she hissed. "It binds the seal. Without it, the barrier won't hold. Now do it." My hand shook violently as I raised the blade. The room seemed to tilt and sway like the deck of a boat in a storm. Every instinct screamed to drop the knife and run, but there was nowhere left to run. I took a shaky breath and dragged the blade across my palm. The pain was immediate and electric, a hot shock that made my vision swim. Crimson drops splattered into the iron bowl. The moment my blood hit the bottom, it began to hiss and steam, the scent of salt and metal filling the air. Mara's chant grew louder, her voice rising and falling like a tidal chant, echoing off the walls in a language older than memory. The hexstone pulsed wildly, glowing brighter with each drop. I could feel it tugging at my heartbeat, sinking itself to me. "Hold the bowl steady," Mara barked, her hands busy sprinkling salt and crushed seashells into the mixture. My fingers spasmed, slick with blood, but I managed to keep the bowl from tipping. My head spun, and I felt dangerously close to passing out. Suddenly, a deep, rumbling boom reverberated through the cafe floor, like a giant fist pounding on the earth from below. Plates rattled, a few fell to the ground and shattered. A cold wind howled through the walls, despite every window and door being sealed. Mara's eyes snapped to mine. "It's here," she said, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. A dark shape moved beyond the front window, taller than the doorway, limbs bending in impossible angles. The glass frosted over instantly, spider-webbed cracks crawling across its surface. I tried to speak, but my voice stuck in my throat. My blood continued to drip into the bowl, each drop echoing like a war drum. The creature pressed closer, its outline clearer now, a hunched figure with elongated arms that trailed behind it like kelp fronds. Where its head should be was only a mass of churning darkness, shifting and twisting as if it housed an entire ocean storm inside. Then it knocked. 3 slow, deliberate knocks against the glass. The sound pierced straight into my chest, rattling my ribs and sinking its hooks into my spine. I gasped and nearly dropped the bowl, but Mara lunged forward, catching it just in time. "Don't listen to it," she screamed over the rising wind, but the voice slipped into my mind anyway, soft and seductive as the moon pulling at the tide. "Amelia, come home. You are salt and wave. You belong to me." My knees gave out. I fell to the floor, the hexstone dragging me forward like a leash. My vision flickered between this world and another, a black abyss full of swirling currents and glimmering eyes watching from the dark. I saw flashes, my grandmother again screaming on the cliffs, Mara as a young woman, binding wounds with kelp strands, the collector reaching, always reaching. Mara threw the last of the salt into the bowl and gripped my shoulders. "You have to finish it, Amelia. Say the words." Through a haze of pain and saltwater visions, I forced my lips to move. "I am the shore. I am the line. I am the final breath between worlds. The hexstone flared so brightly, it drowned out everything, turning the room into a searing white void. I felt my blood being pulled out of me, not just from my cut, but from my very soul. The air around us trembled, humming like a struck bell. Outside, the collector shrieked, a sound so raw and alien that it shredded the air. The windows finally gave way, shards flying inward like knives. Myra pulled me into her arms, shielding me with her body as glass rained down. The hexstone's light twisted and coiled around us like a living barrier. The creature lunged forward, but as it touched the light, it recoiled, howling in rage. The sound echoed through my skull, vibrating in every cell. I felt the stone's final pulse, a deep, thunderous beat like a war drum. And then everything went silent. When the light faded, I was lying on the floor, my palm still bleeding into the bowl, now blackened and cracked. Mara knelt beside me, her face streaked with tears and blood. She pressed her forehead to mine. "You did it," she whispered, her voice shaking with exhaustion and relief. "You've sealed it. For now." I tried to speak, but only a strangled sob came out. Outside, the fog began to retreat, curling back into the sea like a beast wounded and limping home. But deep inside, I knew this was only the beginning. The ocean doesn't forget, and it never forgives. The first thing I heard was my own heartbeat. It pounded in my ears, slow and heavy, like distant waves crashing on a moonlit beach. Each thud reminded me I was alive, though I wasn't sure if that was a blessing or a curse. I opened my eyes to find myself lying on the diner floor, my blood smeared in dark arcs around me. My fingers twitched, sticky with salt and ash. The air smelled like burnt kelp and iron, sharp enough to make my stomach twist. Mara sat slumped against the counter, her braid undone and hanging over her shoulder like a limp rope. She looked at me with hollow eyes, as if she'd aged 100 years in a single night. "You're awake," she croaked. Her voice was raw, scraped down to the bone. I tried to sit up, but a blinding pain shot through my side. My whole body felt like it had been wrung out and left dry in the sun. "What happened?" I managed, my throat shredded. Mara's eyes flickered to the shattered windows. The morning sun had finally broken through, painting golden stripes across the floor, though everything felt colder than ever. "It's gone, for now," she said. "The collector retreated. You pushed it back." I tried to process her words, but they felt like pebbles skittering across a frozen pond, sliding, scattering, refusing to sink in. "And the seal?" I asked. She looked away, her fingers tracing a jagged crack in the countertop. "You strengthened it, but it's not permanent. Nothing in this world or the next truly holds forever. It will come again." A hollow laugh bubbled up from my chest, sharp and bitter. "Great. So all that blood and screaming for a temporary fix." Mara flinched at my tone, but she didn't argue. Instead, she dragged herself up and shuffled to the iron bowl on the floor. The surface was scorched black, fissures running like lightning across it. She cradled it as if it were a dying child, her fingers brushing the rim with infinite care. "You gave more than just blood last night," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You gave part of your spirit, your will. That is what holds the gate now. You are the line." Her words stabbed into me, each one a salt-coated blade. I closed my eyes, but visions from the night before flooded back instantly. The shrieking thing clawing at the walls, its eyes like abyssal lanterns. My grandmother's silhouette standing on a cliff, screaming into the wind. The ocean's endless, hungry maw. "Why me?" I whispered, more to myself than to Mara. "Why did it have to be me?" "Because you heard it," Mara said, stepping closer. "Long before you ever stepped foot in Harborfield. In every crashing wave, every shell you held to your ear, every nightmare that left you gasping, the sea has called you your whole life. You are not chosen by chance. You are claimed." I wanted to scream at her, to curse the ocean and every ancestor who had decided my fate long before I took my first breath, but all I could do was sit there, shaking, the weight of inevitability crashing down on me like a tidal wave. A sudden movement outside caught my attention. Through the broken window, I saw townsfolk moving up the main road. An elderly man in a wide-brimmed fishing hat, a young mother pushing a stroller, two teenagers dragging surfboards behind them. They all looked the same as before. Normal, clueless. No one paused to look at the shattered windows or the salt lines, or the blood smeared across the cafe floor. They don't know, I realized, my voice flat with disbelief. Mara nodded. They never do. The fog erases their memories. It protects them from the truth they aren't strong enough to bear. I watched them disappear down the street, feeling a strange pang in my chest, relief mixed with resentment. They would go back to their lives, blissfully unaware of the monster that clawed at the edge of their reality. Meanwhile, I would remain here, the living dam keeping their world from being swallowed whole. I turned back to Maura. So what now? We just wait? She shook her head slowly, her braids swinging like a funeral bell. We prepare, we fortify, and you learn. You must understand the rites, the sigils, the ancient vows. You must become stronger, because next time it will not come alone. A chill slithered up my spine. What do you mean, not alone? Mara's eyes went distant, her gaze slipping past me as though she were staring into a memory only she could see. The collector is a harbinger, she murmured, a scout. It tests the seal, weakens it, but beyond it, there are things older than any human language. Things that dream beneath the waves and hunger for the surface. If they come, there will be no sealing them away. Only drowning. The words settled over me like a death shroud. I stood shakily, forcing my body to obey. Every joint screamed in protest, but I refused to stay on the floor any longer. I limped to the broken window and looked out at the ocean. It seemed so calm now, gentle waves rolling toward the shore in innocent white crests. I hated it. I hated its lies, its seduction, its eternal call. But beneath that hatred, something else began to smolder. A dark, fierce resolve. If this was my inheritance, then so be it. If I was the line, I would not break. I turned back to Mara, my breath steadying despite the blood still dripping from my hand. Teach me, I said. My voice no longer trembled. Mara studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she inclined her head. Very well, she said, but understand this. There is no going back, no return to normalcy. Once you learn, you cannot unlearn. Once you see, you cannot unsee. I nodded. I understand. Outside, the wind picked up again, stirring the fog into thin, ghostly fingers that curled around the edges of the cafe. I swore I heard a distant echo in the surf, something deep and ancient, laughing or crying, I couldn't tell. Mara handed me a cloth to bind my hand. I wrapped it tightly, the pain now a sharp, grounding reminder of everything I had given and everything I still had to lose. As I tied the final knot, I looked at the empty street, the indifferent ocean, and the dying embers of the morning sun. I took a breath, tasting salt and iron on my tongue. I am the shore, I whispered to myself. I am the line. I am the final breath between worlds. And in that moment, for the first time in my life, I felt ready. The next night arrived with an unnatural speed, like the ocean pulling the sun below the horizon in one greedy gulp. Mara wasted no time. As the last streaks of orange vanished from the sky, she led me into the back room of the cafe, a space I hadn't noticed before, hidden behind a warped wooden door with a handle wrapped in faded fishing net. Inside, it felt like stepping into another world. The floor was covered in thick layers of sand and crushed seashells that crunched under my bare feet. Strings of dried kelp hung from the ceiling like grotesque streamers. In the center sat a stone basin, cracked and stained, its surface etched with spiraling runes that seemed to shift and ripple when I looked at them too long. Mara moved around the basin, lighting thick candles that reeked of salt and burnt resin. As each flame flared to life, shadows danced up the walls, stretching into monstrous shapes that curled and clawed at the ceiling. Tonight we begin your true education, Mara said, her voice echoing weirdly in the small room. What you faced so far was only the beginning, a test of your will. She gestured for me to sit across from her. I lowered myself slowly, the sand cold against my skin. Close your eyes, she commanded. I hesitated. Even now, part of me wanted to bolt, to run out into the night and pretend none of this had happened. But that part was small now, like an ember choked by a rising tide. I shut my eyes. Listen, Mara whispered. At first there was only my ragged breathing and the faint crackle of the candles. Then, slowly, another sound emerged, low and guttural. Like the ocean's heartbeat heard from beneath the wave, it pulsed against my eardrums, slow and patient, drawing me deeper. My breath slowed to match it. My blood felt heavy, like it had thickened into syrup. Feel the sea inside you, Mara murmured. It has always been there, every tear, every drop of sweat, every salty heartbeat. It remembers. The darkness behind my eyelids shifted. Shapes began to form. A massive whirlpool twisting under moonlight, a field of shimmering eyes blinking in unison, a forest of black kelp reaching up like grasping fingers. I felt my spirit pulled downward, as if I were sinking past the continental shelf, where the world becomes alien and light no longer dares to follow. Somewhere in that crushing black, I saw a faint glow, the hex stone. It hovered before me, alive, its surface writhing with tiny symbols I didn't understand. It pulsed in time with my heart, inviting me closer. I am the shore. I am the line. I am the final breath between worlds. The mantra echoed from nowhere and everywhere at once. My lips moved in sync, mouthing the words without sound. Suddenly, a cold current wrapped around my ankles, spiraling up my legs with a force that felt both tender and possessive. I gasped, instinctively trying to wrench away, but there was no movement, no ground to push against. You are mine, a voice murmured, softer than a sigh, colder than the deepest trench. My eyes flew open. I was back in the room, but my body shuddered violently, sweat soaking my clothes. Mara was still across from me, her eyes closed, her mouth moving in silent incantations. The candles flickered wildly, their flames nearly horizontal as an icy wind cut through the room. The sand lifted in swirling eddies, carrying the smell of rotting seaweed and brine. I felt the hexstone pulse at my chest, its rhythm accelerating. My skin crawled, each nerve screaming that something was moving just behind me, impossibly close. I whipped my head around. There it was, a shape in the corner, tall, indistinct, its edges shifting like smoke underwater. Where its face should have been, there was only a void, a black spiral that seemed to suck the light out of the room. Its fingers, impossibly long and jointless, dripped seawater onto the sand, each drop hissing like acid. My voice stuck in my throat, my mind fractured under the weight of that gaze, my thoughts slipping like fish through broken nets. Mara's eyes snapped open. She slammed her palm into the basin, splashing salt water across the room. The figure recoiled, a guttural screech tearing through the walls like a hurricane ripping a house apart. "Speak the words!" she roared, her voice a sharp blade cutting through my terror. I forced the mantra past my lips, each syllable slicing at my tongue. I am the shore. I am the line. I am the final breath between worlds. The figure staggered, its shape distorting into frantic, convulsing waves. It let out one last shriek before collapsing into the sand in a gush of black water, which evaporated instantly, leaving only a bitter smell of kelp and decay. Silence slammed into the room like a door shutting in a storm. My chest heaved. My vision wavered, static dancing at the edges. Mara stumbled toward me and grabbed my shoulders, her fingers digging in until it hurt. "You held it back," she gasped, her voice hoarse with disbelief and awe. "You didn't break." Tears pricked my eyes, but they didn't fall. Instead, a strange calm settled over me, cold and absolute. "That thing. It spoke to me," I whispered. "It called me, its own." Mara's expression turned grave. She cupped my face, forcing me to look into her eyes. "It will always call you," she said. The ocean's voices are endless and patient. They will whisper until your last breath. You must become louder than them. You must become the storm itself. I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I realized then that this was no longer about survival. It wasn't even about sealing a gate or saving a town that would never know my name. This was about identity, about facing what had always waited inside me, coiled and hungry. I looked down at my trembling hands, flexed my fingers and clenched them into fists. I am the shore, I whispered again, firmer this time. Mara nodded, pride and sorrow blending in her eyes like twilight and dawn. She stepped back, lifting the hex stone and handing it to me. Its surface felt warm now, alive in my palm, as if it recognized me. Tomorrow, Mara said, her voice steadying, we begin to train for war. I nodded, standing taller despite the tremors, still shivering through my bones. Outside, the ocean roared in the distance, not as an enemy tonight, but as an old rival, waiting patiently for its next move. And I finally felt ready to answer its call, not as prey, but as its equal. The next day crawled in on pale, shaking legs. I'd barely slept. My dreams twisted into black spirals of salt water and shrieking things I couldn't see but could feel, clawing at the edges of my mind. Every time I jolted awake, the sound of the waves outside pressed against my skull, like a lover's breath, close, intimate, suffocating. When the sun finally clawed its way above the horizon, I was already standing by the shattered front window, staring at the ocean's gray teeth gnashing at the shore. Mara found me there. She didn't speak at first, just stood beside me, silent, as if mourning something neither of us had the courage to name. Then she moved, a quick pivot that snapped me from my trance. She set a heavy wooden box on one of the cafe's few unbroken tables. It was rough and splintered, held together with rusted nails and twine. Symbols scorched into the wood coiled around it like sea serpents. "Open it," she ordered. My fingers hovered above the lid, trembling. The box vibrated faintly beneath my touch, as if something inside was alive, or remembering how to be. I pried it open. Inside, bones. Long, thin, fish-white bones, knotted together with strands of black kelp and what looked like human hair. They clicked against each other softly, an echo of 100 silent prayers lost to the deep. I recoiled, bile rising in my throat. Mara didn't flinch. These were the offerings of past keepers, pieces of themselves. Each one bound their essence into these bones to strengthen the gate. She picked up a piece delicately, a shard of a finger bone bound in rust-red thread. Her eyes glistened. "This one belonged to your grandmother," she said. "She gave more than any before her, and yet it was not enough." I felt the weight of those words bury itself in my chest. My grandmother's face flashed in my mind, her laugh echoing from some impossible corner of my memory. I wanted to scream at her ghost, ask her why she left me to finish this nightmare alone. Mara placed the bone shard into my hands. It was surprisingly warm, as though it still held a fading heartbeat. My fingers curled around it, and I felt a sharp sting rush up my arm, like a needle injecting salt straight into my veins. "You must add your own piece tonight," Mara said, "to weave yourself into the barrier fully. Only then will it recognize you as its true keeper." "What do you mean, add my piece?" My voice trembled, sounding so small I barely recognized it. Mara's eyes locked onto mine. "A bone, Amelia. A real piece of you." The room tilted. The sea roared louder. I staggered back, the bone falling from my hand and clattering to the floor with a sickening clink. "No," I breathed. "No, I can't. You must," Mara snapped, advancing on me. "Or everything we've done is worthless. The collector will return, stronger than before, and it will not knock next time. It will tear this world open and swallow it whole." Her voice cracked, and for a moment I saw the truth, the fear behind her anger, the desperation clawing at her from the inside. I fell to my knees, sobbing. My hands clawed at my scalp as if I could dig the terror out with my own nails. The ocean's whispers flooded my mind, twisting around my thoughts like barbed wire. Give yourself to me. Become the wave, become the end. Mara knelt beside me, her hands gripping my shoulders so tightly I thought they might shatter. You are stronger than you think, she said, softer now, her forehead pressed to mine. Stronger than me, stronger than Iris. You are the final line. I shook my head violently. I'm nobody. I was supposed to be normal. I didn't ask for this. No one ever asks, Mara whispered. But you are here, and you are the only one who can finish it. A horrible silence fell between us. My chest heaved, my heart smashing against my ribs like a wild animal in a cage. Finally, I lifted my head. My eyes felt raw, scalded by salt and grief. How? I asked, my voice barely a thread. Mara didn't hesitate. She drew a small hook knife from the box. Its blade was black, shimmering with an oily sheen, and etched with runes that made my eyes water just to look at them. You must carve a piece from yourself, she said, handing me the knife with trembling fingers. A finger, a piece of rib, something that carries your essence, your will. I stared at the blade. It felt impossibly heavy in my hand, as though it carried the weight of every keeper who had come before me. Mara pressed the fish-white bone shard from my grandmother into my other palm. She believed in you, she whispered. So do I. My mind screamed at me to run, to smash the windows and sprint into the sea, to let the waves swallow me whole rather than face this horror. But beneath that chaos, a small ember of something else flickered. Resolve. I closed my fingers around the knife, my knuckles turning white. I pressed it to my side just below my ribs and took a deep breath. Mara's hands closed over mine. Steady, she said, her voice breaking. The blade bit into me with a fire so fierce my vision blacked out. I felt the steel scrape against bone, felt the blood flood hot and fast down my side. I screamed, a sound that tore from my soul, echoing off the walls and out into the night beyond. When it was done, I collapsed forward, my forehead smacking the sand floor. My breaths came in shallow gasps, each one soaked in salt and pain. Mara carefully lifted the small, bloodied shard of rib I had cut for myself. Her tears dripped onto it as she wrapped it in kelp and black twine, then placed it gently into the box with the others. It is done, she choked out, her voice trembling with a mix of horror and reverence. I lay there, feeling my blood soak the sand beneath me, knowing I had crossed a line I could never return from. Outside, the sea roared again, but this time it sounded almost uncertain, as if it too knew I had finally begun to become something it had not expected. I was no longer just a girl running from the tide. I was becoming the tide. The pain didn't stop. Hours after Mara sewed me up, I still felt each heartbeat echoing through the open wound beneath my ribs. Every throb reminded me of the cost, not just of flesh, but of the last fragile illusions I'd clung to. Mara moved around the room with frantic precision, her steps carving a restless spiral into the sand floor. She mumbled to herself in that same deep, undulating chant, the syllables weaving through the air like salt-laden mist. I lay on my side, curled around the pane, watching her as if she were some distant figure on the horizon. My breath rattled, each inhale a wave crashing too hard against the rocks. I thought of my grandmother again. Her laugh, the warmth of her wrinkled hands, the way she used to hum when she made tea on stormy mornings. All those gentle memories felt poisoned now, infected by secrets and broken promises. A sudden, sharp clang snapped me out of my haze. Mara slammed the fishbone box shut, her fingers trembling as she locked it tight with strands of kelp and black twine. She turned to me, her face pale and slick with sweat. "We have no more time," she said. Her voice was sharp, stripped of any softness. "The collector has begun to gather its kin. You can hear it, can't you?" I swallowed hard, my throat raw. At first I thought she was hallucinating, but then I heard it, a distant low rumble that seemed to come from the deepest parts of the earth. It was not thunder. It was a chorus, a shuddering vibration that crawled up my spine and rooted itself behind my eyes. I felt it in my teeth, in my bones. in the new hollow place where a piece of me had been carved away. "They're coming," I whispered, my voice shaking so badly it barely left my lips. Mara nodded. Her eyes were wide, frantic. "Tonight, we will complete the rite of salt and bone. You must stand as the final bulwark." I tried to sit up, but agony lanced through my side, white-hot and merciless. I gasped, collapsing back into the sand. Mara dropped to her knees beside me, grabbing my face in her cold, callous hands. "Listen to me, Amelia. You are more than your pain, more than your fear. You are the line, the tidebreaker. You are Quinn blood, and that means you do not get to fall." Her words cut sharper than any blade. Somewhere deep inside, past the terror and despair, I felt a spark flicker. A tiny, stubborn ember that refused to die, no matter how many waves tried to smother it. I gritted my teeth and forced myself upright, each movement sending jolts of electric agony through my ribs. My head spun, black spots crawling at the edges of my vision, but I stayed up. Mara watched me with a mix of horror and awe. I looked down at my hands, stained with salt, blood, and sand. They no longer looked like the hands of a young woman searching for an escape. They looked like weapons. "What do I have to do?" I croaked. Mara grabbed a jar from the shelf, its surface crusted with dried sea salt and barnacles. She popped the lid and dumped the contents into the stone basin. A swirl of coarse salt, powdered coral, and small pieces of broken shells that clattered like brittle bones. Then she handed me the hex stone. It glowed softly now, like an ember smoldering in the dark. Its warmth pulsed against my palm, syncing with the ragged rhythm of my heart. "You will pour your blood into the basin," Mara said, her voice low and steady. "Then you must chant the binding words and place the hex stone at the center. Your spirit will fuse with the barrier completely. You will become its anchor." "And if I fail?" I asked. Mara didn't answer. She didn't need to. Outside, the low chorus grew louder. The windows trembled, vibrating as if struck by a giant, invisible fist. I crawled toward the basin, each inch an eternity. When I reached it, I could barely hold myself upright. I pressed the tip of Mara's hooked knife to my palm again, reopening the wound that had barely begun to close. Hot blood spilled into the mixture, hissing as it touched the salt and coral dust. Steam rose in thin, ghostly curls that smelled like tide pools and rust. I lifted the hex stone, my fingers trembling so violently I thought I might drop it. Mara hovered beside me, her hands spread in a protective arc, chanting louder now, her voice shaking the walls. "I am the shore. I am the line. I am the final breath between worlds." I began the mantra, my voice cracking at first, then growing stronger. Each repetition felt like a hammer striking steel, forging something new and terrible inside me. Outside, shapes pressed against the windows, shadows with too many limbs, faces that melted and reformed like wax in boiling water. They clawed and writhed, their shrieks slicing through the night air. I forced my focus back to the basin. I am the shore, I am the line. I am the final breath between worlds. The mixture inside began to churn, swirling violently as if stirred by an unseen hand. The hexstone's glow intensified, throwing harsh, flickering light across the sand walls. I felt my mind start to slip, pulled toward a cold, crushing darkness that promised oblivion and peace. My eyelids fluttered, heavy as anchors. Then I heard her. My grandmother's voice, soft but firm, cutting through the fog in my mind. "Stand, Amelia. Stand and fight." My eyes snapped open, blazing. I slammed the hexstone into the center of the basin. A deafening roar erupted, drowning out the shrieks and the wind and the pounding at the windows. For a heartbeat, everything went white. Then, silence. I collapsed backward, gasping for breath, every nerve in my body on fire. When my vision cleared, the basin was still. The shadows at the windows had vanished. The air felt clean, heavy with salt, but no longer with dread. Mara fell to her knees beside me, sobbing. She pressed her forehead to mine, her tears mixing with the blood and salt on my face. "You did it," she whispered. "You held the line." I didn't speak. I couldn't. I lay there, staring up at the ceiling, feeling something shift deep inside me. A part of me had been taken, but something new had been born in its place. Something as old and wild as the sea itself. Tonight, I had become more than the shore. I had become the storm. When I finally came back to myself, the air felt thick, electric, as if the entire room was still buzzing from some cosmic thunderclap. Mara helped me sit up, her hands surprisingly gentle against my sweat-slick skin. My ribs felt like cracked driftwood. My lungs burned as though I had inhaled a bonfire, and my head pounded with the rhythm of a distant drum. The sea's drum. But I was alive. I touched the basin with trembling fingers. The mixture inside had solidified into a hard, salt and coral crust, almost like a frozen whirlpool. The hexstone sat in the center, now dark and still, its glow gone. It looked dead, or asleep. Mara watched me closely, her red-rimmed eyes reflecting 100 silent storms. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Instead, she simply pressed her forehead to mine, a quiet, desperate gesture that spoke volumes more than any chant or prayer. Outside, the night had gone quiet. No shapes clawed at the windows, no fog pressed against the glass. The ocean had retreated to its moonlit horizon, the waves gently lapping the shore like a dog too tired to bark, but I knew better. I stood slowly, feeling every inch of my body protest. My legs wobbled as though I were standing on a rocking boat. Mara tried to steady me, but I waved her off. I needed to stand on my own. I shuffled toward the window. From here, the beach looked almost beautiful. Pale moonlight spilled across the sand, making it shimmer like a field of silver coins. The distant waves glittered with ghostly phosphorescence. I pressed my palm against the glass, feeling the faintest vibration beneath it, like a heartbeat under ice. I knew the ocean hadn't given up. It had only pulled back to study me, to watch its new rival. The fight wasn't over. It would never truly be over. But for tonight, it had chosen to retreat. Behind me, Mara finally spoke, her voice hoarse and low. "You were always meant to do this," she said. Even Iris knew. She tried to protect you, but she knew. I closed my eyes, swallowing the fresh surge of anger and sorrow that rose in my throat. "My grandmother, she lied to me my whole life," I said, my voice cracking. "She made me believe the ocean was just some pretty backdrop to my childhood. She never told me it was watching me, waiting for me to step forward." Mara stepped beside me, her reflection a broken ghost in the cracked window. "She lied because she loved you," she whispered, "because she wanted to give you at least a few years of freedom before you carried this burden. That's more mercy than most keepers ever got." I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I could forgive that choice. Maybe one day, maybe never. The thought of my grandmother singing to me on the beach, her voice dancing with the wind, now felt like a knife turned in my gut. But somewhere deeper, under the raw betrayal, there was a small, flickering warmth, a memory of love that refused to die. I took a shuddering breath and turned to face Mara fully. "What now?" I asked. She looked at me, her eyes brimming with a kind of exhausted pride. "Now, we rebuild. We prepare for the next breach. We study. You learn the rights, all of them. Not just to hold the line, but to push back, to carve your will into the sea itself." A laugh burst out of me, sharp and wild, echoing strangely in the quiet room. "You want me to fight the entire ocean?" I said, shaking my head. Mara didn't laugh. She only nodded. "You won tonight," she said softly. "But the sea is endless. It will keep coming. You can't just hold it. You must become its match." I felt a cold, coiled resolve slither through my veins at her words. Become its match. I remembered the shapes calling at the glass, the endless black spiral of the collector's face, the 1,000 voices calling my name from beneath the waves. They had wanted me to drown, to submit, to vanish into their cold embrace. but I hadn't. I turned back to the window and pressed my forehead to the cold glass. Beyond the shoreline, a distant shape rose from the waves, a towering figure, vague and shifting, like a mountain trying to stand on legs. For a moment, our gazes locked across the moonlit water. My lips curled into a snarl. "I am the shore," I whispered. "I am the line. I am the final breath between worlds." The shape shuddered and dissolved back into the sea. A sharp pain flared under my ribs, a reminder of what I'd sacrificed. I pressed my palm to the bandaged wound, feeling the blood and salt crust beneath. Mara stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Get some rest," she urged, though her voice trembled. "You'll need your strength for what's coming." I looked at her, really looked, and saw the haunted child still hidden inside the warrior woman. She had been fighting so long she had forgotten how to hope. I reached out and took her hand. "We'll fight together," I said. "I won't let you face this alone anymore." Her face crumpled, and she let out a single ragged sob before pulling me into a tight, trembling hug. We stood there like that, two salt-stained sentinels in the dark, listening to the ocean breathing beyond the glass. Outside, the waves whispered against the shore, a lullaby or a threat. I couldn't tell which anymore, but tonight, I wasn't afraid. Tonight, I wasn't just a girl running from the sea. I was the storm rising to meet it. The next morning arrived, wearing a disguise. Sunlight spilled into the cafe through the shattered windows as if nothing had happened, turning the sand-smeared floor and blood-salt crust into something almost beautiful. The breeze smelled of sea foam and wildflowers. The ocean beyond the dunes looked soft, harmless, a wide blue grin hiding sharp teeth. But I knew better. I limped behind the counter, my side screaming with every step. Mara had wrapped the wound tight in sea-soaked cloths, layered with kelp salves that smelled like low tide and burnt sage. It still felt like a piece of me was missing, not just a shard of bone, but a sliver of something deeper. Mara moved around the room with ritualistic purpose. She traced salt lines on the door frames, dipped candles into melted black wax, and murmured to herself in a language that felt like thunder rolling far out at sea. I watched her as I sipped burnt coffee. Every bitter swallow grounded me, reminded me I was still here, still human. Finally, she turned to me, her face drawn and pale. "We don't have long," she said. "The collector is nursing its wounds, but the sea doesn't stay quiet for long. It will send new tides, new things to test the seams." My fingers tightened around the coffee mug. The faint tremor in my hand betrayed the fear I still carried like an anchor tied to my ribs. "What do we do?" I asked. Mara's eyes softened, a fleeting glimpse of the woman she might have been before this life chose her. "We learn to strike first." She beckoned me to follow her to the storeroom. We stepped past the empty pie racks, the broken jukebox still stuck on a silent record, and through a door marked "Employees Only" that I had never dared open. Inside was a room that felt older than the cafe itself. The walls were covered in kelp-wrapped talismans, seashell charms, and bones hung on frayed ropes. The air was heavy with brine and old secrets. In the center sat a massive iron basin filled with what looked like thick, black oil. Its surface shifted and rippled as if alive. Mara gestured to it. "This is the Well of Echoes. It holds memories, voices from every keeper before you. From every battle fought, every wave turned back." I swallowed, my throat dry as driftwood. "And you want me to, what, stare into it?" "Not stare," she corrected. "Merge." My heart slammed into my ribs. "Merge." She stepped closer, her fingers curling around my wrist. "If you're to become more than a barrier, you must understand your enemy. You must feel its hunger, its patience. Let the well show you." My first instinct was to pull away, to run, but I thought of that night, the way the collector's hand pressed against the glass, its spiral face pulling at my mind. I had survived that. I could survive this. I stepped forward. The surface of the well shimmered, a sound halfway between a welcome and a threat. I reached out and touched it. The sensation hit like an undertow, ripping me downward. My knees buckled. I felt Mara's hand steady me as the world vanished. Then, darkness. But not empty darkness. I felt it, the pull of tides from centuries ago, the whispers of keepers whose names had been swallowed by time. Their voices curled around me, cold and insistent. You are the line, you are the gate. Images crashed over me like waves. A woman on a rocky cliff, screaming chants into a hurricane. A man wading waist-deep into the surf, dragging a bleeding net behind him. A child no older than 10 drawing salt circles on a beach at dawn, tears streaking her sandy face. All of them felt the same, alone, terrified, unwavering. Their fear blended with mine, fusing into something molten and fierce. Suddenly, I felt another presence, slick and massive, sliding beneath me like a shark in deep water. Amelia, it breathed, 1,000 voices echoing inside my skull. Return, surrender. The sea is your beginning and your end. I gritted my teeth. No. It pressed closer. I felt it curl around my bones, slithering into the hollows of my missing rib. We can end your pain. You are nothing without us. I shoved back, summoning every memory of my grandmother's laugh, Mara's chants, the salt crusting my wounds. I am the shore, I snarled. I am the line. I am the final breath between worlds. The darkness shrieked. I felt it recoil, the water boiling away from my mind. The visions snapped, the voices scattered like startled gulls. I gasped, collapsing to the ground in the storeroom. The iron basin was smoking now, thin tendrils of vapor rising and curling like fingers. Mara knelt beside me, her hands cradling my face. Her eyes shimmered with something like pride. You fought it, she whispered. You didn't drown. I looked at her, my chest heaving, sweat soaking my hair. I didn't win, I rasped, but I didn't drown. She smiled, a real fragile smile that cracked through the storm lines on her face. That's enough for today, she said. Tomorrow, we begin to teach you how to call the storm yourself. I let out a sharp, breathless laugh, the sound breaking and reforming in my throat. Call the storm, I repeated, tasting the words like salt on my tongue. Outside, a distant wave slammed into the shore, louder than before, as if it had heard us and was already answering. I looked at the basin one last time, its surface still quivering. My reflection stared back, my eyes brighter, my face leaner, my scars singing with something dark and ancient. I didn't recognize that girl anymore, and for the first time, I wasn't sure I wanted to. I didn't sleep that night. Mara insisted I try, but every time I shut my eyes, the black spiral of the collector's face reared up from the deep, clawing at the edges of my mind. Its whispers pressed against my skull like barnacles on a sinking hull. Return. You were always meant to return. I spent the dark hours wandering the cafe's wrecked dining room, tracing the salt lines with my fingers, whispering my mantra under my breath like a prayer, like a curse. I am the shore. I am the line. I am the final breath between worlds. Sometime past midnight, Mara appeared at the edge of the room, watching me. Her face looked even older in the dim moonlight, the lines cutting deeper across her skin. You need to rest, she said softly, but there was no conviction in her voice. She knew as well as I did that rest wouldn't come. I can't, I murmured, shaking my head. It waits for me when I close my eyes. Mara sighed and gestured for me to follow her. We moved to the storeroom again, the air inside thick with the smell of burnt kelp and salt. The iron basin was covered now with a coarse fishing net, as if we were trying to keep a sleeping beast from escaping. Mara motioned me to sit. She knelt opposite me, placing a wide, flat bowl between us. She poured water into it, thick, brackish, shimmering with flecks of something phosphorescent. This is the sea's tongue, she said. An old rite, older than any keeper's blood. It will let you speak back to the ocean. To answer its calls with your own voice? My throat tightened. Speak back? You want me to talk to it? She nodded. If you only listen, you'll drown. If you want to become more than a barrier, you must make it hear you. I looked at the bowl. The water's surface rippled even without touch, swirling in slow spirals that seemed to reach for me. I swallowed hard, my body trembling. What if it hears me and takes me anyway? Mara's gaze didn't waver. Then you fight. You fight until your last breath. That's all any of us can do. A scream crawled up my throat, but I bit it back. Instead, I lowered my hands to the edge of the bowl. The water jumped at my touch, the spirals tightening into an eager whirlpool. Mara began to chant, her voice low and rhythmic, the syllables rising and falling like a tide. My pulse synced with her words, my mind slipping sideways into that liminal space between breath and drowning. The water shifted, and suddenly I wasn't looking at the bowl anymore. I saw a vast, underwater trench, black as a starless sky, pulsing with pale, flickering lights that looked like eyes opening and closing in slow succession. Shapes moved at the edges, massive and boneless, their limbs waving in currents that didn't exist on any earthly shore. At the center of it all, the spiral face. It leaned closer, impossibly close, the water around it boiling with whispered words. Amelia. I felt its hunger slide over my skin, its need wrapping around my ribcage like a cage of kelp. But this time I didn't recoil. I planted my hands firmly against the edge of the bowl, my fingers digging into the wood. I am not yours, I spat, my voice reverberating in the water in the trench. The spiral twitched, startled. You are made of us, it hissed, the voices layered and discordant. Salt and wave, you are a daughter of the abyss. I am the shore, I screamed. I am the line. I am the final breath between worlds. The trench quaked. Pale lights flared and flickered out. The spiral writhed, its coils unraveling in jagged, violent snaps. Mara's chant rose behind me, a wave pushing me forward. I am not yours, I roared again, slamming my palm against the water so hard it splashed up, cold and stinging across my face. The spiral let out a sound, a shattering, keening shriek that made my skull feel like it was fracturing from the inside. Then it began to retreat, pulling into the depths like a wounded eel slipping beneath rocks. I gasped, my vision shuddering. My head slammed backward, and I crashed onto the floor, water cascading over me in heavy sheets. Mara was at my side in an instant, her hands gripping my shoulders, shaking me back to reality. Amelia! Amelia, stay with me! I coughed up seawater, hacking and spitting until my lungs felt like they were on fire. When I finally caught a breath, I looked up at her, eyes wild. I spoke back, I wheezed. It heard me. It felt me. Mara's expression shifted, fear and wonder battling across her face. You pushed it back, she whispered. You made it listen. No keeper has ever done that before. I forced myself upright, my hair soaked and clinging to my face like kelp strands. Every part of me trembled, but there was a spark in my chest now, fierce, defiant. I won't just hold the line, I said, my voice rough but rising. I'll push it. I'll make it remember my name. Mara stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Then she nodded, tears cutting clean lines down her salt-streaked cheeks. Then you are ready, she said. Ready to become more than a keeper, ready to become the storm. Outside, I heard a distant thunderclap. Even though the sky was clear, the ocean answered with a rolling roar, as if shifting uneasily under my defiance. I stood slowly, my breath sharp and ragged. I could feel it. The ocean watching me, assessing me, recoiling from the small but growing flame in my chest. I pressed a hand to my ribs, feeling the steady drum of my heartbeat. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of its rhythm. For the first time, I felt like it was truly mine. I didn't need a clock to tell me the hour. The ocean told me. I felt it in my bones before I heard it. A low, rolling growl that vibrated through the floorboards, up my spine and into my skull like a war drum. It wasn't the gentle hush of waves kissing sand. It was deeper, hungrier. Outside, the moon hung bloated and yellow, draped in ragged strips of fog like a corpse wrapped in seaweed. The dunes looked sharper in its glow, jagged as broken teeth, and the water beyond seethed with a strange, restless luminescence. Mare stood by the shattered window, her hands clutching a talisman made of driftwood and knotted kelp. Her eyes tracked the surf like a hunter waiting for a shape to rise from the reeds. I stood behind her, wrapped in my grandmother's old oilskin coat, the hexstone hanging heavy around my neck. Its pulse had shifted from a gentle thrum to a deep throbbing beat that matched the ocean's voice. It felt like standing on a fault line seconds before it splits open. Mara's voice broke the tension, low and strained. Tonight isn't another test. Tonight, the sea comes to claim you fully. I didn't answer right away. My fingers worked the edge of my coat, twisting and knotting the fabric like a prayer I couldn't say aloud. You think I'm ready? I asked finally, my voice coming out hoarse and cracked. She turned to look at me, her eyes shining with fear and pride and something I couldn't name. No one is ever ready, she said, but you are willing. That is more powerful than any chant or bone offering. A tremor passed through the cafe then, a sudden jarring shudder that rattled dishes still clinging to the shelves. We both flinched, and my hand flew to my ribs, instinctively protecting the fresh scar beneath the coat. Outside, the sea rose higher than I'd ever seen. Walls of water surged and curled back, revealing shapes that didn't belong to any earthly tide. Long, ropey limbs, glimmering eyes, bright as fishing buoys, mouths that opened too wide, ringed with translucent teeth. The collector had not come alone this time. I felt my stomach lurch, bile clawing at the back of my throat. My knees went weak, and for a moment I thought I'd collapse. But then the hexstone flared at my chest, burning hot, reminding me of the price I'd paid to stand here. Mara stepped close, gripping my face between her hands. "Listen to me," she hissed, her forehead pressing to mine. "This is your moment. You hold the line, not for me, not for Iris, but for yourself. The ocean only respects strength. You must speak to it as its equal, or it will devour you whole." My breath came in short, sharp gasps. The memory of that abyssal trench flickered across my mind, the collector's spiral face whispering promises of release and surrender. But under that, deeper than fear, I felt something else rising. Rage. All those years of half-truths and stolen choices. The childhood lullabies that were actually incantations. The birthdays spent watching waves that watched back. I wanted to tear the sea apart with my bare hands. A thunderous boom shook the building. The front door bulged inward, salt water dripping from its hinges. The walls groaned like a ship's hull under sea. Mara broke away, moving quickly to light candles across the threshold. Each flame flared tall and white-hot, forming a quivering barrier against the advancing dark. I moved to stand beside her, the hexstone thrumming so fiercely it felt as though it might crack open my sternum. Outside, a shape rose above the dunes. Taller than the cafe, its head brushed the fog-shrouded moon, its limbs stretched and swayed, dripping sheets of seawater that hissed against the sand. Its spiral face tilted downward, searching. Then it saw me. A sound like 1,000 storms crashing in unison roared through the air. Windows exploded inward, showering us with shards. Salt spray rushed inside, soaking the floor and snuffing out half the candles. I stood my ground, my feet sinking into the slick tiles as if the ocean was already trying to drag me under. "Amelia." The voice was everywhere, inside my skull, under my ribs, echoing behind my teeth. It felt like it came from my blood itself. "Child of salt. Last of the line. Come home." I clamped my hands over my ears, though it did nothing to stop the sound. My knees buckled, and I dropped to the floor, screaming. Mara's hands were on my shoulders, her own voice rising in a chant so desperate it bordered on a scream. I didn't know the words, but they tore through the room like a blade, pushing back the ocean's command just enough for me to breathe. I forced my eyes open. Through the shattered window, the collector leaned closer. Its spiral spinning faster now, pulling at the air, at my breath, at my soul. I staggered to my feet, fingers wrapping around the hexstone so tightly it cut into my palm. "I am not yours," I shrieked. "I am the shore. I am the line. I am the final breath between worlds." The collector shuddered, its spiral convulsing in jagged, furious twists. Waves crashed violently beyond it, throwing up walls of foam and writhing shadows. It lunged forward. Mara threw herself in front of me, her arms raised, chanting so loud her voice cracked open. The last candles flared and went out, plunging us into moonlit chaos. I felt the hexstone ignite in my hand, a blinding light that forced me to shut my eyes. The warmth turned searing, as though it wanted to crawl under my skin and fuse with my bones. Through the deafening howl of the sea and Mara's screams, one thought cut through, cold and clear as a blade. If I wanted to survive this, if I wanted to end this, I couldn't just stand here. I had to become the storm I'd sworn to be. I opened my eyes. The collector loomed before me, so close I could see the faint shimmer of scales beneath its translucent skin, its spiral face warped, ready to consume. And I stepped forward. I don't remember deciding to move. One heartbeat I was behind Mira, her broken voice fighting to hold back the sea's roar. The next, I was stepping past her, out into the shattered threshold of the cafe, my bare feet slicing on shards of glass and salt-encrusted wood. The wind tore at my hair, whipping it across my face like wet kelp strands. The ocean beyond the dunes boiled in the moonlight, waves hurling themselves against the sand with a fury that felt personal. And above it all, the collector waited. Its spiral face spun so quickly now that it blurred into a single writhing vortex. In that spiraling darkness, I saw every memory I had ever buried. My grandmother's soft lullabies, Mara's harsh lessons. Every night I spent on a beach staring at the water and feeling it stare back. It felt like the eye of a hurricane, a place where everything was silent and everything was ending. "Amelia," it whispered, its voice deep as a trench, echoing through my marrow. "You are mine, Saltborn. Come home." I clutched the hexstone so tightly I felt my bones shift. My skin split. Hot blood pooled down my wrist, mixing with the salt spray on my fingers. "No!" The scream ripped out of me, raw and primal, shredding my throat on its way out. My voice cracked the air like lightning, pushing the fog backward in a sudden, violent gust. Mara fell silent behind me. I could feel her eyes on my back, feel the tremor of her disbelief. The collector recoiled, its enormous body lurching backward, the spiral stuttering for a moment. It didn't expect resistance. It didn't expect me to step forward instead of cower. I waded into the water. The first wave hit my knees, icy and vicious. The next slammed against my waist, nearly knocking me off my feet. But I kept moving, my legs burning, each step an act of defiance. Around me, shadows writhed beneath the surface, shapes with too many limbs, glimmering eyes, gnashing maws. The sea's children. They clawed at my legs, pulling, tugging, desperate to drag me under. But I tore free, stumbling forward, the hexstone glowing brighter with each heartbeat. I felt it then, the shift inside me. The place where my rib had been cut out, the hollow space I thought would always be empty, now burned with something new. A savage warmth, a molten resolve. "I am the shore," I shouted into the storm, my voice echoing across the black wave. "I am the line. I am the final breath between worlds." The collector howled, a sound that split the moonlight and rattled the stars. The spiral spun faster, a desperate, convulsive twist. I raised the hexstone above my head. Its light exploded outward, white-hot and violent, turning the night into a searing dawn. The shadows shrieked and writhed, the water around me bubbling as if it were alive and in agony. The collector lunged again, its arms stretching across the entire shoreline, clawed fingers digging into the dunes. Its spiral face twisted toward me, wide and furious. "Come home," it roared. I stepped deeper until the water reached my chest. Current pounded against me, trying to shove me backward, but I held my ground. I looked into that spiral and felt every cell in my body scream with terror. It would be so easy to give in, to let the waves swallow me, to surrender and let the sea claim me forever. But instead, I left the hexstone higher. "I am not yours," I roared, each word tearing something loose inside me. I am the storm. I am the breaker. I am the last breath. The hexstone pulsed and a crack shot through it, bright and jagged like lightning splitting a black sky. The collector's spiral face convulsed, its edges fraying, pieces breaking away like torn sails in a hurricane. A deafening roar shook the world, 1,000 tidal waves crashing all at once. I felt my body start to disintegrate, my legs going numb, my heartbeat stuttering. The light of the hexstone flooded every nerve, every drop of blood, burning away the last soft pieces of me. I pushed forward one last time, screaming into the void. A final surge of light erupted from the hexstone, a searing blast that swallowed the collector's spiral face completely. The creature shrieked, a terrible, ancient sound that rattled the bones in my skull. And then, silence. I fell backward, the ocean suddenly calm beneath me, the waves cradling my body like a mother rocking a child. Above me, the moon burned cold and distant, no longer wrapped in fog. I floated there, gasping, my limbs heavy and useless. The hexstone slipped from my fingers, now split and dark, drifting away into the deep like a dead star. On the shore, Mara screamed my name. Her voice reached me, thin and brittle, but I couldn't move. The exhaustion wrapped around me like a blanket, pulling me downward. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I felt the ocean's final pull, that soft invitation to let go, to sink into the dark forever. My body sagged, my breath faltered, but then something inside me flared. The ember that had survived every night, every ritual, every whisper from the deep. It blazed now, savage and defiant, roaring louder than the sea. My eyes snapped open, I sucked in a ragged breath and kicked my legs, breaking the surface. My head burst above the waves and I screamed into the moonlit sky. I am still here! Salt water poured from my mouth as I coughed and flailed toward the shore. Each stroke felt impossible, my muscles shredded and burning, but I refused to stop. When my hands finally clawed into wet sand, I collapsed, sobbing and shaking. Mara ran to me, falling to her knees, pulling me into her arms. Her fingers dug into my shoulders, her tears hot against my skin. You came back, she choked out. God, you came back. I pressed my forehead to hers, breathless and raw. I didn't drown, I whispered, my voice as sharp and broken as shattered shells. I didn't let it take me. She held me tighter, rocking us both as the waves finally quieted behind us, whispering softly like a lullaby. In that moment, under that cold, watching moon, I realized I had not only survived the sea, I had defied it. Mara's arms felt like an anchor and a lifeline all at once. She held me so tightly I could barely breathe, but I didn't care. My entire body shook as if I'd been struck by lightning. Every muscle felt raw, every bone felt cracked open. My lungs burned with seawater and salt, and my ribs screamed every time I drew in a shuddering breath. But I was alive. Somewhere in the distance, the ocean panted like a beast forced into retreat. The waves came in slow, hesitant pulses, no longer clawing at the dunes. The fog had pulled back into the horizon, leaving the beach bare under the bruised moonlight. I pressed my forehead into Mara's collarbone, tasting blood and salt on my lips. She whispered my name again and again like a prayer. After what felt like a century, she pulled back, her fingers gripping my face. Her eyes were bloodshot, her cheeks slick with tears and salt spray. You did it, she breathed. You held the line. You forced it back. I tried to answer, but the words wouldn't come. My mouth opened and closed. My tongue felt like a foreign object in my skull. All I could do was sob. Great heaving sobs that rattled the night air. Mara pressed her forehead to mine again, her voice low and trembling. You are not just a keeper anymore, she said. You're something else now. You are the storm, the living shore. I wanted to argue, to tell her I wasn't anything but broken pieces stitched together by blood and stubbornness. But even in my exhaustion, I could feel it, a pulse deep inside me, stronger than any heartbeat. The ocean had tried to pull me under, and I had answered with fire. I had become the line. Mara helped me to my feet. I staggered like a newborn foal, my knees buckling under me. She held me upright, her strength somehow limitless even though her hands trembled. We turned to face the sea. The waves now looked almost peaceful, shimmering under the moon like scattered coins, but I knew better. I could feel it still watching, still waiting, nursing its wounds in the deep. I took one shaky step forward, planting my feet in the wet sand. Each grain felt like a needle digging into my skin, but I welcomed the pain. It grounded me, reminded me I was still here. I raised my chin, staring out at the horizon. "Come back if you dare," I rasped, my voice barely louder than the wind. "I will be here. I will always be here." A cold gust rose from the waves, whipping my hair across my face like seagrass. In that moment, I swore I heard something. A hiss, a promise, or a curse echo across the surface before it vanished into the night. Mara's hand found mine, her grip fierce and protective. "We should go inside," she said, her voice raw. "Your body, it needs warmth, healing." I nodded, but my eyes stayed locked on the waves for one last heartbeat. Only when I was sure the sea had truly pulled back did I let her guide me away. Back in the cafe, the air felt heavy with ghosts. The shattered windows let in the cool night breeze, and the salt lines on the floor looked like battle scars. I could almost hear the echoes of my own screams rattling off the walls. Mara sat me down on a stool behind the counter. She moved with careful urgency, lighting candles and pouring steaming water into a chipped mug. Her hands fumbled, clumsy with adrenaline and relief. I watched her in silence. Every movement she made felt sharper now, as if the world had been carved into higher resolution. My senses sparked with a brutal clarity. The smell of kelp in her hair, the thin thread of a scar above her eyebrow, the tremor in her fingers when she set the mug down in front of me. When she finally looked at me, her face broke. She sank to her knees, burying her face against my thigh. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, her breath hot against my skin. I slid my trembling fingers into her hair, gripping the strands like a lifeline. "Mara," I croaked, the word cracking apart in my throat. She didn't answer. She just stayed there, as if letting go of me meant surrendering to the sea once and for all. I tilted forward, pressing my forehead against hers, our breaths mingling in the cold air. "I'm still here," I whispered. "I didn't let it take me." She finally looked up, her eyes wide and desperate. "I thought I lost you," she choked out, "when you stepped into the water. I thought." I cut her off, pressing my fingers to her lips. "I chose to step forward," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I chose to fight it on its own ground." Her tears spilled over again, but she nodded, clutching my wrist so tightly I felt her pulse hammer against my skin. Outside, the waves whispered against the shore, softer now, like an exhausted adversary retreating to lick its wounds. The moon hung lower, its silver light dripping over the dunes and the ruined porch. I looked around the cafe, at the salt lines, the broken glass, the dark stains that marked where we had stood our ground. It felt less like a diner now, and more like a war temple. "I need to learn everything," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "Every rite, every chant. I won't wait for it to come to me again. Next time, I go to it." Mara's breath caught. Then, slowly, she nodded, her face twisting into something between horror and admiration. "You are Iris's granddaughter," she whispered, "and so much more." I tightened my grip on her hand, the old fire roaring in my chest again. "I am the shore," I said, my voice rising. "I am the line, and I am coming for it next." A single tear slid down Mara's face as she let out a shaky, disbelieving laugh. "God help the ocean," she said softly. I looked past her, out to the moonlit sea, and felt it shudder. For the first time, I saw fear in its depths. Morning crawled over Harborfield like a wounded animal. Gray lights seeped through the shattered windows of the cafe, illuminating the battlefield we had left behind. Broken salt lines, shattered glass, blood-streaked floors. Every scar told a story, and every story was mine now. Mara had fallen asleep at my feet, her head resting against my knee, like a sentinel who had finally allowed herself to collapse. Her hair, matted with sea spray and tears, glimmered under the pale dawn. I watched her breathe, each inhale shaky but defiant. Outside, the ocean whispered against the shore, a tired lover trying to lure me back to bed. But I didn't move. I felt like a blade left out in the rain, battered but sharper for it. I touched the hollow beneath my ribs, feeling the tender, puckered skin where my rib had been cut away. That space pulsed now, filled not with weakness, but with a new, wild energy. The sea had tried to break me. Instead, it had forged me. Mara stirred, her hand curling around the hem of my coat, as if afraid I might disappear again. Her eyelids fluttered open, and when her gaze found me, it softened instantly. "You're still here," she murmured, her voice gravelly. I managed a faint smile. "I told you, I'm hard to drown." She let out a breath that was half a laugh, half a sob. She sat up, stretching her arms until her joints cracked, then stood and pulled a heavy, barnacle-crusted book from under the counter. "This," she said, dropping it onto the blood-streaked table with a thud that echoed in my bones, "is the Grimoire of Tides." Iris added her chapters, and now, so will you. I stared at it. Its cover looked like driftwood, warped and water-stained. Strange sigils ran across it like scars, shifting and writhing when I tried to focus on them too long. Mara flipped it open to a blank page. The edges of the parchment were frayed, smelling faintly of salt and rotting seaweed. She pulled a small knife from her belt and handed it to me. I didn't flinch. "Your blood," she said simply. "Your vow. Your command to the sea." I pressed the knife to my palm without hesitation, slicing the skin open. Hot blood welled up instantly. I held my hand above the page and watched the drops fall, spreading into shapes that writhed before settling into symbols I didn't recognize. My blood speaking a language I hadn't yet learned, but somehow understood in my marrow. Mara watched in silence, her breath shallow. When the final drop hit the page, I lowered my hand. The symbols glowed faintly, as if catching the last echoes of moonlight. I set the knife down and met her gaze. "Teach me," I said. "All of it. The chants, the old languages, the knots and bindings. No more waiting, no more reacting. I want to strike first." Her expression twisted, a war of pride and terror battling across her face. "You don't understand what you're asking for," she said softly. "Once you open yourself fully to that power, you'll never be the same." "I'm already not the same," I snapped, my voice sharp enough to cut through the morning fog. "I stepped into that water. I faced it. It knows me now, and it fears me." Mara's eyes welled, and she turned away for a moment, wiping her face with her sleeve. When she turned back, her expression had hardened, her spine straightening like a drawn bow. "Fine," she said, "then we begin now." She started with the chant of bone, a series of guttural syllables that scraped the throat raw. Each word felt like dragging nails across my soul, but I forced them out, again and again until the room seemed to thrum with their echo. Next came the salt bindings, intricate knots tied with threads soaked in brine and ash. My fingers cramped and bled, but I kept going, ignoring the pulsing ache in my palms. Mara corrected me sharply, slapping my hands when the knots faltered, forcing me to untie and redo them until they felt like extensions of my own heartbeat. Hours blurred, the candles burned low. Blood dripped onto the floor in quiet, patient tap. By the time we paused, the sun had climbed halfway across the sky, bathing the cafe in a harsh, sterile light that made every wound look deeper. Mara sank into a chair, her shoulders heaving. "Enough for today," she rasped. But I shook my head. "No, more." She stared at me, disbelief carved into every line of her face. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Then we continue," she whispered. She taught me the tide sight, a trance to pierce the ocean's veils and glimpse the shapes that waited beyond the horizon. I pressed salt into my open wounds, forcing my spirit to stay sharp as the visions clawed at my mind. I saw writhing cities beneath the waves, lit by pale, bioluminescent sigils. I saw the collector drifting in the deep, nursing its spiral face, hissing my name into the darkness. When I surfaced from the trance, I vomited black water onto the floor. Mara wiped my face clean, her touch gentle despite the ferocity in her eyes. "You are becoming more than a keeper," she murmured, almost to herself. "You are becoming the storm they never wanted us to be." I met her gaze, my breath ragged. "Good," I spat, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand, "because I'm coming for them next." Outside, the sea gave a single rolling boom, like a war drum echoing across the shore. For the first time since I was a child, I felt the ocean flinch. I pressed my bleeding palm to the grimoire of tides, feeling my blood and salt soak into the parchment. My voice trembled at first, then rose, strong and hungry. "I am the shore," I said. "I am the line, and now I am the hunt." Mara shivered, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. She looked at me as if seeing a prophecy unfold in real time, terrible and beautiful and unstoppable. Somewhere in the distance, a wave crashed so violently that the windows rattled. I looked up, grinning through the blood and salt. "Let them come," I whispered. "I'll be waiting." The next night felt like standing on the edge of the world. The ocean had gone eerily silent, as if holding its breath. A heavy fog crawled up the beach, smothering the dunes and curling around the battered porch of the cafe. It pressed against the broken windows like an intruder, listening. Mara and I worked in silence. Our hands moved in a frantic dance, knotting, binding, painting runes on the floor in a mixture of ash, blood, and thick black salt she had dug up from some hidden cellar. My wounds pulsed with each movement. Pain had become my new pulse, echoing in my head like a war drum. Every time my knees threatened to buckle, I forced them to lock again, planting my feet as if I were anchoring myself to the earth itself. I didn't want comfort. I wanted war. Mara looked up from her work, sweat dripping from her chin. Her eyes met mine, bright and haunted. "Are you certain?" she rasped. "Since we crown you, there is no stepping back onto the shore. You'll belong to the tide as much as you fight it." I clenched my jaw, blood from my cracked lips trailing down my chin. "I've belonged to the tide since the day I was born," I said. "Tonight I claim it back." Her gaze broke and she turned away, her shoulders trembling. But she didn't argue. She reached under the counter and pulled out a small, weathered box bound in rusted chains. When she set it on the table, the wood pulsed as if something inside was still alive, still watching. She unlocked it carefully, her fingers trembling with reverence and terror. Inside lay the salt crown, a jagged circlet formed from blackened coral, shards of bleached bone and thick cords of kelp twisted into intricate patterns. Dried barnacles clung to the edges like tiny, silent sentinels. My throat tightened at the sight of it. "How many wore this?" I whispered. Mara's eyes flickered, and her voice dropped to a hush. "3. Your grandmother was the last. Each one believed they could end the collector. Each one failed, but each one weakened it." A wave of grief and rage slammed into me, almost sending me to my knees. I imagined my grandmother on some storm-lashed cliff, the salt crown digging into her brow as she screamed into the darkness. They had all carried this same fire, and tonight, I would become their final echo. Mara lifted the crown with both hands, her fingers shaking so violently I thought she might drop it. "Kneel!" she commanded. I sank to the floor, my ribs grinding, my knees bruising against the blood-smeared tiles. My head bowed, hair falling around my face in tangled, salt-streaked curtains. Mara stepped forward, the crown hovering above me. Her voice dropped into a chant, low and guttural, each word slicing through the air like a blade. "Blood to salt, salt to bone, bone to tide, tide to storm." The chant echoed in my skull, vibrating in my teeth, my spine, my hollowed rib. I felt the ocean surge against the shore beyond the walls, each wave answering her words with a hiss. When she lowered the crown, I felt it pierce my scalp instantly. Tiny spines dug into my flesh, each puncture a white-hot explosion of pain that stole my breath. Blood spilled down my forehead, into my eyes, my mouth. I screamed, a raw, primal cry that rattled the windows and rolled out over the dunes. The fog outside recoiled, swirling violently as if something massive was thrashing beneath it. I felt its attention snap to me, the sea itself turning to listen. Through the veil of agony, I heard Mara's voice rise into a roar. "Rise, storm-blooded, rise and claim the tide!" I slammed my palms to the floor, fingers clawing into the runes we had painted. Power surged through me, so intense I thought it might rip me apart from the inside. Visions split across my mind. Endless trenches filled with screaming shapes, towers of bone growing from the ocean floor, the collector's spiral face twisting in the black. "Come home." The voice pressed into my head like a blade. "You are salt. You are wave. You are mine." My jaw locked. I pushed back. "I am not yours," I snarled, spitting blood onto the floor. "I am the line. I am the break, and I am coming for you." The crown burned hotter, fusing to my skin. I felt every keeper before me, their screams and chants rising through my veins, a chorus of defiance and grief and endless, hungry rage. Outside, the ocean let out a shriek, a sound so high and sharp it shattered the last intact window. Shards rained down, slicing my arms and shoulders, but I barely felt it. I pressed my forehead to the floor, blood smearing the runes. My voice dropped into a low, guttural chant that wasn't taught to me. It rose from somewhere deeper than bone, a language born of storms and hunger. I am the shore. I am the knife. I am the teeth in the tide. The air convulsed, the walls shuddering. Salt sprayed up from the cracks in the floor as though the sea itself was trying to break in. Mara fell back, shielding her eyes from the blast of light erupting from my chest. Her mouth moved silently now, her own prayers lost under the roar. I rose slowly, my legs trembling but unbroken. My head felt heavy under the salt crown, but it felt right, as if it had been waiting for me all my life. I turned toward the broken doorway, staring into the churning fog. Beyond it, I saw shapes writhing, shivering, the sea's children, the collector's heralds. I stepped forward, my foot striking the floor with a heavy, deliberate thud. "Come," I roared, my voice amplified by the crown, echoing across the dunes and out to the black horizon. "I am here. I am ready." For a breathless moment, the fog froze. The ocean stilled. The world itself held its breath. Then, from deep in the sea, I felt it move. Not a whisper this time, a charge. A tide coming not to test, but to kill. I grinned, blood slicking my teeth, my fingers curling into fists. "Let's finish this," I whispered, stepping into the doorway as the first wave of shadows began to crawl toward me. The moment my foot crossed the threshold, the world shattered. The fog split open like a wound, spilling shapes that didn't belong to any mortal shore. Limbs too long, eyes that glowed like deep-sea lanterns, jaws unhinging in silent gnashing laughter. Each shape slid forward on a tide of black water that reeked of brine and rot. They came at me as one, like a living wave. But I didn't step back. I slammed my foot into the sand, the salt crown humming on my brow. My blood sang with every keeper before me, every chant, every sacrifice that had ever been etched into the grimoire. I drew a breath so deep it felt like I was pulling the entire ocean into my lungs. My ribs screamed against the strain, the old wound beneath them threatening to rip open. But I didn't stop. I roared. The sound tore through the fog, a ripping, violent shockwave that snapped the nearest creatures in half. Their bodies evaporated into steaming pools of brine, shrieking as they dissolved. The rest hesitated, quivering in the moonlight like startled insects. I could feel the collector behind them, its presence pressing down from the horizon like a thunderhead. I felt its rage, its surprise, its seething hunger. It had never been challenged here, on land, in my realm. Tonight, that changed. I surged forward, each step hammering the sand with enough force to send cracks through the ground. My fingers curled into claws. I grabbed the nearest shape, a serpent-thin creature with a maw full of needled teeth, and ripped it apart like wet paper. Salt and black water splattered across my chest, burning into my skin and feeding the fire inside me. Another lunged at my back. I spun and smashed my forehead into its skull, the salt crown driving deep into its flesh. It writhed, its cries echoing up into the moonlight before its body caved in on itself and vanished into vapor. They kept coming. A creature with crab-like claws snapped at my throat. I let it get close, then drove my knee into its center, splitting it in two. My hands moved on their own now, faster than thought, as if the storm itself had possessed me. Mara stood at the doorway, her hands pressed to the frame, chanting so loudly her voice turned ragged and raw. Runes flickered around her, flaring and vanishing like fireflies caught in a hurricane. I felt her prayers crash against me in waves, each syllable stitching my wounds closed even as new ones opened. For a moment, time felt like it folded in on itself. I saw every keeper before me, my grandmother, a line of women and men stretching back into blackness, each crowned in salt and coral, each facing the tide alone. But tonight, I wasn't alone. I roared again, my voice crashing through the dunes. The remaining shadows flinched, hesitating. In that split second, I leapt forward and slammed both fists into the ground. A shockwave of salt erupted outward, blasting a dozen creatures into ribbons of dark foam. The air crackled with energy, the moonlight warping around me like a heat mirage. Beyond the fog, I saw it. The Collector. It rose from the waves like a leviathan, its spiral face spinning so fast it blurred into a single gaping void. Arms as long as ship masts stretched out, dripping sheets of seawater and viscera. Its voice boomed from every direction, rattling the dunes and slicing through my mind. "Enough!" I staggered, the power of that word slamming into my chest like a hammer. My vision flickered, black spots dancing across my eyes. My knees buckled, sand swallowing me to my shins, but I forced myself up, teeth bared, blood bubbling at the corner of my mouth. I spit onto the sand, the droplet hissing as it touched the earth. "Not enough," I snarled. "Not even close." The Collector roared, its spiral splitting open like a wound, revealing a churning mass of smaller mouths inside, each shrieking in dissonant harmony. It lunged forward, dragging the ocean with it in a towering wave. Mara screamed behind me, her chant peaking into a single piercing cry. I dropped to one knee, plunged my fingers into the sand, and drew a massive rune, an ancient glyph I had only seen in fleeting visions, passed down through blood and salt. The sand hissed, blackening as my blood dripped into the grooves. The moment I finished, I slammed my palm into the center. A column of light exploded from the earth, spearing upward into the heart of the approaching wave. The Collector reeled back, its arms flailing as the beam tore through its spiral face, sending shards of its essence splattering into the sea. I felt my body start to fracture under the force. My skin split, salt water gushing from the wounds instead of blood. My vision tunneled, my breath coming in ragged, savage gasps, but I stayed standing. "Come on!" I roared, every syllable burning my throat. "Come and finish it!" The Collector shrieked again, a deafening animal howl that shook the sky. It reared back for one final assault, waves towering behind it like walls of liquid night. I looked over my shoulder at Mara. Her eyes glowed with horror and love, her lips forming a single word, Amelia. I turned back to the ocean, my body trembling on the edge of collapse. "I am the shore," I whispered. "I am the line." I raised my arms, the salt crown gleaming under the moon like a blade drawn from the deep. "And tonight, I am the storm that drowns you." The Collector surged forward, the ocean screaming with it, and I charged to meet it, head on. I felt the sea's scream tear through my marrow as I sprinted into the wave. The Collector's final surge towered above me, a cathedral of black water and writhing limbs. Lightning forked inside it, illuminating twisted, eyeless faces pressed against the liquid walls. Mouths opened and closed in silent prayers. or curses. I couldn't tell which. The salt crown burned on my brow, its spines drilling deeper, fusing to my skull. Every step felt like I was splitting apart, each bone ready to shatter under the ocean's crushing howl. But there was no going back. The moment my feet hit the first curl of the wave, the world went silent. Time warped, stretching into an infinite breath. I saw each drop of water suspended around me, each fleck of salt gleaming like a star, and in the heart of it all, the spiral face. It pulsed and spun, a vortex of infinite hunger and hatred. The collector's essence bled into the water, its thousand voices colliding inside my head, screaming promises of oblivion. Give in, sink, rest, you are ours. My hands curled into fists so tight my nails cracked through skin and drew blood. My ribs howled, my heart stuttered, but the ember inside me, that single savage spark, flared brighter. I thought of my grandmother chanting into the storm with salt in her hair. I thought of Mara, her hands trembling as she crowned me. I thought of every keeper who had fallen before me, each one whispering my name from the darkness. I roared. The sound burst from me like a tidal shockwave, shaking the sea walls around me. The water shivered and fractured, splintering into shards of dark foam and mist. The collector shrieked, its spiral convulsing wildly. Its limbs swung at me, slicing through the air like scythes. I ducked and lunged forward, my entire body moving on pure instinct, the instinct of something more than human now, something forged in storms and sharpened by salt. I slammed my palms into the spinning spiral, the crown channeling raw energy through me. My flesh split at the seams, salt water and blood cascading out in violent gushes. But I didn't stop. "In the shore!" I screamed. My voice cracked the moonlight, split the fog, and rolled back across the dunes like thunder. The collector howled, twisting and writhing. Its spiral began to buckle, edges fracturing like glass under a hammer. Black water gushed from the cracks, sweeping away its own children in retreating torrents. "I am the line!" I bellowed, pressing deeper. My vision blurred, my bones felt molten, but I forced my hands further into the spiral's core. The collector's arms wrapped around me, pulling, crushing. Ribs snapped, lungs collapsed, but I laughed, a sound so feral it felt alien even to my own ears. I am the final breath between worlds. The spiral cracked wide open. A blinding burst of light erupted, flooding my mind with every drowned memory the sea had ever claimed. I saw entire cities swallowed by storms, ships shattered beneath impossible waves, souls drifting in blackness weeping salt tears. For one terrifying moment, I felt all of it. Every loss, every scream, every echo of the ocean's insatiable hunger. My knees buckled, my spine curved, my body ready to implode from the weight. Then, deep inside that maelstrom of sorrow and rage, I found a single note of silence, a hollow echo waiting for something to fill it. Me. I took that silence and pulled it into myself. My body exploded with light. A column of searing white that punched through the spiral and shot into the sky, splitting the clouds like a spear. The collector's shriek rose into a high, keening wail, its limbs thrashing wildly. I felt it try to pull away, to retreat into the depths, but I held on. I leaned forward, forehead pressing into the spiral's churning surface. "This is my shore now," I whispered, voice low, trembling with finality. "Mine!" The spiral convulsed one last time, then split down the center. A deafening, wet crack echoed across the dunes. Black water exploded outward, turning instantly to steam under the raw light bursting from my core. The collector's limbs flailed once more, then collapsed into the retreating wave, disintegrating into 1,000 ribbons of frothing darkness. And then it was gone. The silence that followed felt heavier than any scream. The ocean fell flat, slack as a corpse, the waves rolling in like gentle sighs. Fog peeled away from the dunes, revealing the starlit sky above, clear and infinite. I stumbled forward, falling to my knees in the shallow surf. The salt crown finally cracked and crumbled from my head, its pieces sinking into the sand like old bones. I heaved in a ragged breath, tasting iron and salt. My vision flickered. My body was little more than an open wound held together by will and defiance. Behind me, I heard a distant, broken sob. Mara. I turned slowly, each movement agony. She stood at the edge of the dunes, her hands clasped over her mouth, eyes wide and overflowing. When our gazes met, something in her shattered. She sprinted to me, crashing into my chest and nearly knocking me over, her arms wrapped around my waist, her face pressed into my ruined skin. I sagged into her, my forehead falling onto her shoulder. "I thought I lost you," she gasped, her fingers clawing at my back, as if to keep me tethered. I tried to speak, but only a weak wheeze escaped. I pressed a trembling hand to the side of her face, my thumb smearing salt and blood across her cheek. "You didn't," I finally rasped, voice a raw ghost of itself. "I found the line, and I held it." She sobbed, nodding into my chest. Beyond her shoulder, the ocean lay still, its surface flat and dark as obsidian. The collector was gone, for now, but I felt its echoes deep under the waves, remnants of its rage and grief drifting in the currents. I knew it would try again. The sea always does, but tonight I had won. I leaned into Mara, letting my weight collapse into her arms, my body finally giving in to the darkness clawing at the edges of my vision. As the world began to fade, I felt her whisper against my ear, "You are the storm now." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. When I woke, the world felt alien. The cafe ceiling loomed above me, its water-stained tiles flickering in and out of focus. A lantern burned on the counter, its flames swaying with each whisper of wind that slipped through the shattered windows. I tried to move. Agony snapped through my body like a lightning strike. My ribs felt like broken driftwood. My lungs burned as if I had inhaled the entire ocean. But I was alive. I turned my head slowly, every joint protesting. Mara sat slumped in a chair a few feet away, her head resting on her chest. Her hands were clasped so tightly around a blood-soaked rag that her knuckles had gone white. When she heard me groan, her head snapped up. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment her face crumbled into pure, raw relief. "Amelia," she choked, stumbling forward. She fell to her knees beside me, her fingers trembling as they hovered over my forehead, my cheeks, my chest. "You shouldn't be alive," she whispered. "You shouldn't." I managed a rough, broken laugh that turned into a cough, spraying flecks of blood across her sleeve. "You always said I was stubborn," I rasped. She let out a sob that turned into a short, hysterical laugh. She pressed her forehead to mine, her tears mixing with the salt crusting my skin. "You didn't just hold the line," she whispered against my cheek. "You broke it. You shattered him." I didn't answer. My body felt too heavy, my mind too frayed. Memories of the collector's spiral, the crashing wave of shadow, the sound of my own bones breaking. They tumbled inside me like stones in a riptide. Outside, I heard the ocean again, but it sounded different now. Tame, almost shy. The waves rolled in softly, licking at the sand instead of devouring it. Mara pulled back slightly to look at me. Her eyes burned with something fierce and unfamiliar. Hope. "You've changed everything," she said. "The barrier is stronger now. The sea feels it. It knows your name, Amelia." I closed my eyes, letting her words wash over me. My fingers twitched, aching to touch the grimoire, to trace my blood-written vow again and remind myself that it had been real. A sudden gust blew in, rattling the few intact window panes. Mara flinched, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting some new horror to crawl inside. But I knew there wouldn't be. Not tonight. My voice came out thin and cracked. "It'll come again," I said. "The ocean doesn't forgive." She turned back to me, nodding slowly. "Yes, but it will think twice before it dares to face you again." I forced a small, tired grin. "Good. Let it fear something for once." Mara brushed the hair from my forehead, her fingers careful, reverent. She leaned in and pressed her lips to my brow, a blessing, a goodbye, a thank you, all at once. "You are the first keeper to choose the offensive," she murmured. "You didn't just guard the gate. You met it in its own abyss." A shudder ran through me at the memory, but I felt no regret, only a low, cold satisfaction that thrummed through my veins like a new heartbeat. Mara stood, her knees cracking. She grabbed a clean cloth and began wiping the blood and salt from my chest, her motions gentle. Each touch felt like a benediction, a quiet promise that I wasn't alone. As she worked, I let my gaze drift to the doorway. Dawn had begun to creep over the dunes, turning the sky a bruised purple that slowly bled into pink and gold. The first light touched the waves, making them shimmer like glass. For the first time in what felt like lifetimes, I saw the sea not as an enemy but as something wounded. It had recoiled, licked its wounds, but beneath that surface, it still churned with memory and malice. I knew that better than anyone now. "Tomorrow," Mara said softly, breaking the silence. "Tomorrow we start to rebuild the defenses. We strengthen the runes, bury new salt lines, rewrite the chants." I nodded weakly. "But today," she continued, her voice catching, "today you rest. You have earned it." A sob climbed up my throat, unexpected and sharp. Tears spilled down my temples, cutting through the salt and blood crusted on my skin. I felt her hands on my face again, catching every tear. "You hear me?" she said fiercely, her forehead pressed to mine again. "You stay, you fight, you live." I wanted to tell her I would, that I would stay, fight, live, not just for me, but for her, for Iris, for every keeper who had fallen before me. But my voice failed, so I only pressed my forehead harder against hers, letting my tears speak the vow I couldn't voice. She stayed there with me until my trembling eased, until my eyes grew heavy and the world started to blur at the edge. As I slipped under, I heard the sea call to me one last time, but this time, it didn't sound like a scream. It sounded like an old adversary retreating into the deep to plan, to plot, to heal. I smiled faintly, tasting blood and salt on my lips. "Rest," I whispered to it in my mind. "You'll need it." Darkness swallowed me then, but for once it felt like a blanket instead of a grave. And as I drifted off, I heard Mara's voice echo in the distance, strong, fierce, and full of something that felt suspiciously like faith. "You are the storm now." And for the first time in my life, I believed her. I didn't dream. When I finally clawed my way out of the heavy dark, I expected the ocean's whispers to be there, slithering around my mind like eels. But there was only silence. Sunlight streamed into the cafe, warming my skin where it touched the rough, salt-stained floorboards. It felt alien, almost holy after so many nights spent in moonlit horror and fog. I shifted and groaned. Every muscle ached, like I'd been dragged across rocks. My ribs felt like they were barely holding together, and dried blood cracked at the corners of my mouth. A shadow moved beside me. I turned my head, and there was Mara, standing over a pot of steaming water on the old stove. She looked different in the daylight. Smaller somehow. The fierce lines of her face softened, her eyes sunken but shimmering with quiet determination. When she saw me stir, relief flooded her features like a breaking wave. "You stubborn girl," she muttered, wiping her hands on her apron. She crossed the room in 2 quick steps and dropped to her knees beside me. I tried to speak, but my throat felt like it had been scoured with broken shells. She shushed me, pressing her fingers lightly against my lips. "Not yet," she said. "Drink first." She slid an old metal cup under my chin, tilting it carefully. Warm, salty broth touched my tongue, and I almost sobbed at the taste. My cracked lips stung, but I drank greedily, each swallow sending shocks of life down my spine. When I finally pulled away, she set the cup aside and cupped my face in her hands. "How do you feel?" she asked. I swallowed, voice rough as a crow's caw. "Like I fought the ocean." A broken laugh burst from her lips, and she pressed her forehead to mine again. The simple, human touch felt like an anchor in a world that had tried so hard to pull me under. "You did," she whispered, "and you won." I closed my eyes, letting her words sink in. It didn't feel like victory, not exactly. It felt like survival, sharpened into something harder, something older. When I opened my eyes again, Mira had leaned back. Her fingers traced the ragged scars that crawled across my chest and arms. Her expression traced the ragged scars that crawled across my chest and arms. Her expression turning somber. "You are marked now," she said softly. "The scene knows you. It will never stop testing you." I nodded, my jaw tightening. "Good," I croaked. "Let it come." Her gaze snapped up to mine, and for a moment I saw fear there, not for herself, for me. But there was pride too, deep and raw. She stood and disappeared behind the counter. I listened to her rummage through drawers and shelves, the clang of metal and scrape of ceramic oddly comforting. When she returned, she carried a small, warped mirror and an old chipped basin filled with warm water. "You need to see," she said. She held the mirror above me. I sucked in a ragged breath. My face looked like it had been carved from salt and ash. Pale scars traced down from my temples like lightning strikes, fanning out across my collarbones and ribs. My eyes, they were no longer just mine. The blue had deepened, threaded with flickers of white that sparked and shifted when I moved. In the center of my forehead, where the salt crown had fused, a new mark gleamed, a faint, spiral-shaped scar, still raw and red, echoing the collector's face. I reached up with trembling fingers and touched it. The mark pulsed under my skin, alive. "Your inheritance," Mara murmured, her voice reverent and afraid all at once. "The final seal." I let my hand fall, a strange calm settling over me. "I'm not afraid anymore," I whispered. "Only the night caught." Mara studied me, her lips parting as if to argue, then she stopped. She saw it too. Whatever innocence had survived before the storm, whatever hesitation still clung to me, it was gone now. She dipped a cloth into the basin and began wiping the blood and salt from my skin. Her hands were careful but firm, the way you might handle an ancient weapon, both dangerous and sacred. I watched her work, my mind drifting. I thought of the ocean lying quiet beyond the dunes. I could feel it even now, a restless presence gnawing at the horizon. It was weakened, but it wasn't finished. Neither was I. When Mara finished, she set the cloth aside and sat back on her heels. Her eyes searched my face, as if looking for the girl I used to be. "What will you do now?" she asked finally, her voice low. I pushed myself up onto my elbows, pain blazing through my ribs. The motion felt like defiance itself. "I'm going to learn," I said, each word a vow. Every rite, every chant, every secret the sea thought it could keep hidden from me. Mara's breath hitched. "And then?" she asked. I met her gaze, my lips curling into something between a snarl and a smile. "Then, I'll take the fight to it," I whispered. "I'll push into the deep. I'll make the ocean remember me, not as its child, but as its reckoning." A long silence hung between us. Then Mara reached out, her fingers curling around my wrist. Her grip was iron, strong despite her shaking hands. "I will stand with you," she said, "until the very end." Emotion clawed up my throat. I gripped her hand back, so tight I felt the bones shift. "Then let's start," I said. "We don't have forever." Outside, the ocean shuddered, as if it had heard my promise and flinched. Mara stood, pulling me up with her. I leaned on her, my legs still fragile, but my spirit felt unbreakable. As we stepped to the broken doorway, I tasted the salt on the air. Beyond the dunes, the water gleamed under the rising sun, no longer an endless predator but a challenge waiting to be met. I squared my shoulders, blood and salt drying on my skin like war paint. "Your move," I whispered to the waves, and for the first time, I swore I heard the sea hesitate. Mara and I stood together in the doorway, the morning sun turning the shattered glass at our feet into 1,000 tiny mirrors. Each shard reflected pieces of me, The new scars on my face, the lightning white sparks threading my irises, the spiral brand burning on my forehead. The ocean glimmered beyond the dunes, deceptively serene, but I could feel it shifting beneath that shining skin, restless and wounded, plotting its next move. Mara released my arm and stepped forward. The wind tugged at her hair, lifting it like black seaweed in a current. She closed her eyes and tilted her face toward the sun. "When Iris crowned me," she said, her voice low and distant, "I thought I understood sacrifice. I thought I knew what it meant to be keeper of the line." I watched her shoulders tremble, her hands curling into fists at her sides. "But I was wrong," she continued. "We were all wrong. We thought the sea could be reasoned with, that it respected bargains and blood sacrifices." She turned to face me. Her eyes shimmered with something I'd never seen there before. Awe, fear, and an unshakable loyalty. "You didn't just survive," she said, stepping closer. "You changed the covenant. You made it fear us. You gave us a new language, one of teeth and defiance." I swallowed hard, my throat still raw. "I didn't want to just hold the line," I rasped. "I wanted to become it." Mara's lips twitched into a small, pained smile. "And you did," she whispered. She took my hand and guided me back inside. The cafe felt like a husk now, each splintered table and shattered plate a reminder of every scream and every victory we'd clawed from the night. But it wasn't dead. Not yet. She led me to the back room, the place where the grim war of tides waited. The air felt thick, electric. It clung to my skin like cold breath. The book sat in the center of the salt-lined floor, its warped driftwood cover glistening as though it had been freshly pulled from the sea. My blood mark still pulsed faintly across its surface, runes shimmering like tiny ghost fires. Mara knelt beside it, her fingers hovering above the page. She looked up at me, her face gaunt but resolute. "Finish it," she said. "Write your covenant, seal it in your blood. Command the sea to remember." My breath stuttered. Every part of me ached, my muscles still screaming from the battle. But this felt more terrifying than stepping into the collector's spiral face. Because this was final. This was choice, not survival. I dropped to my knees, the floor biting into my scarred skin. I took the knife Mara offered, its blade dulled from countless rites. My hand didn't shake as I dragged it across my palm this time. The blood welled up thick and dark, smelling of iron and salt and moonless night. I pressed my palm to the open page. Instantly, the grimoire drank it in, the runes crawling outward like veins in cracked ice. I felt them worm up my arm, burrowing under my skin, stitching into my bones. My mouth fell open as a howl ripped free, not of pain, but of power. Visions slammed into me, towering waves bowing beneath me, the collector's spiral dissolving into silt, old keepers standing on distant cliffs with their arms open to the sky. My grandmother stood among them, her hair whipping around her face, her eyes fierce and proud. "You are the line," her voice echoed. "You are the tide's final edge. You are the answer." I gasped and pressed harder into the book, my blood flooding the pages until they turned black. A deep hum rose from the grimoire, vibrating through the floor and up into my chest, rattling my teeth. Mara began to chant behind me, her voice hoarse and ragged but unwavering. Each word felt like a nail driven into the ocean's heart. Salt to bone, bone to line, line to storm, storm to soul. I felt my spirit stretch outward, into the dunes, into the surf, down into the abyssal trenches where nameless things slept and waited. I saw the sea flinch, felt it retreat into itself, felt its primal mind turn over this new shape in its darkness. I spoke, my voice echoing in every ripple, every fish scale, every drop of brine. "I am Amelia Quinn," I roared. "I am the shore you cannot cross. I am the line you cannot erase. I am the final breath you will never steal." The grimoire snapped shut beneath my hand, the echo cracking through the walls like a cannon blast. Salt exploded outward, slamming into the walls, searing new protective sigils into every surface. I collapsed forward, my forehead hitting the book. My breath sought in and out, each inhale dragging in ash and salt and iron. Mara's hands gripped my shoulders, steadying me as I trembled. "You did it," she whispered. Her tears fell onto the back of my neck, hot and human. "You commanded it. You didn't beg, you didn't plead, you ruled." I turned my head slowly, meeting her eyes. "We're not just keepers anymore," I rasped. "We're the storm's architects now." She let out a shuddering breath, her lips parting in a broken laugh that cracked into a sob. Outside, a single wave rolled in and kissed the sand gently, as if testing the air, testing my new vow. Then it pulled back, quieter than I'd ever heard. I pushed myself up, swaying, my palms still leaking blood onto the salt-caked floor. Mara rose with me, her hand gripping my arm like a lifeline. "We have work to do," I said, my voice hollow but unyielding. She nodded, her eyes burning. "Then let's rebuild this place," she said. "Let's turn it into a fortress the sea will never forget." I looked at her, at the grimoire, at the quiet ocean beyond the broken windows, and I smiled. For the first time, it wasn't a mask. We worked until our fingers bled. Mara and I ripped up the warped floorboards, revealing layers of salt-stained earth beneath. Every nail that screeched free felt like a ghost, screaming its last curse into the morning light. The cafe groaned around us as if remembering each shriek, each tide that had threatened to tear it apart. Mara carried heavy pails of black salt and ground coral from the storeroom, her arms shaking but unwavering. I mixed them with ash and the blood still dripping from my reopened palm, creating a thick, gritty paste that smelled like the bottom of a hurricane. We traced new sigils across the foundation, shapes older than language, their edges writhing when you looked at them too long. Each stroke burned against my skin like acid, but I pressed on, sweat and salt stinging my eyes. Mara chanted under her breath the entire time, her voice low and hoarse, sometimes cracking, but never stopping. It felt like we were stitching a wound so deep it reached into the marrow of the world. At one point, I looked up and found her watching me. Her hands were raw, her eyes dark with exhaustion. But when our gazes met, something bright flickered in her. "We're making it ours," she said softly. "Not just a defense, but a warning." I nodded, my chest heaving, blood dripping from my knuckles onto the runes below. "Let the ocean see," I rasped. "Let it tremble every time it thinks of this shore." The wind outside shifted, carrying the tang of salt and something sharper, fear. The waves had receded so far that the beach looked endless, as though the sea had decided it wasn't worth the fight today. When we finally stopped, the sun had crested overhead, turning the salt on our skin into a brittle crust. We collapsed onto the ground side by side, our chests rising and falling in ragged unison. Mara turned her head to look at me. A half smile ghosted across her cracked lips. "Your grandmother would have hated this mess," she said, her voice ragged with laughter and grief. I let out a hoarse, broken laugh that tore at my ribs. "She liked her rules," I managed, closing my eyes against the sting of sunlight. "She never imagined someone would paint the runes in open defiance." Mara's hand found mine in the dust. Her grip was firm and grounding, as though she was afraid I might slip back into the sea if she let go. "You've changed the line," she said quietly. "The keepers were always servants. You're a commander." The word felt foreign in my mouth, like a new tooth pushing through raw gums. I rolled it around in my head before I answered. "I'm not just holding it anymore," I said slowly. "I'm daring it to try me again." Mara shivered at that, but she didn't pull her hand away. Her fingers tightened around mine, our blood and salt mixing into a bond stronger than any vow I had ever spoken. We lay there in silence, listening to the distant hush of the retreating tide. Each lull felt like a breath held too long, each crash against the shore an echo of a heart trying to remember its own beat. Finally, Mara pushed herself up on trembling arms. Her silhouette against the shattered walls looked like a black lighthouse, steadfast and scarred. "Come," she said, offering her hand. "There's more to do. The grimoire needs to be rewritten, the talismans recharged. You must learn to weave the deeper knots, the ones even Iris feared. I took her hand, pulling myself to my feet. My legs quivered under me, but I stood. Every nerve in my body screamed for rest, but there was no rest for us now. We moved through the cafe like two revenants, gathering broken plates, sweeping shattered glass, reclaiming this space, piece by piece. Every cut on my fingers felt like a new signature against the sea. Every breath felt like a challenge hurled across the dunes. At one point I found a photo under a collapsed shelf. My grandmother, young and fierce, standing beside Mara in front of the cafe. Her eyes glimmered even in the faded ink, her hand curled protectively around Mara's shoulder. I held it up to Mara without a word. She took it, her fingers tracing the image with reverence. Her breath hitched, and she pressed the photo to her heart. "Iris would be so proud of you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "She thought she had to choose for you. She didn't believe you would ever be strong enough to choose for yourself." A quiet rage simmered in my chest. "She should have known better," I said, my voice low. Mara met my gaze and nodded once, tears tracking clean lines through the salt on her cheeks. "She should have," she agreed. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around her. We clung to each other, two broken things held together by shared scars and unspoken promises. Outside, the sea shifted again, a distant rumble vibrating through the ground beneath our feet. I felt its gaze, its ancient mind gnashing somewhere deep below the waves. I pulled back and looked toward the water, my fingers curling into fists at my sides. "You hear me?" I called, my voice echoing through the ruins of the cafe. "This shore is mine. This line is mine. If you come again, I will tear you apart piece by piece." The wind whipped through the doorway, carrying the scent of brine and something new. Resignation, perhaps, or the faintest thread of respect. Mara stepped beside me, her shoulder brushing mine. Together, we watched the surf shudder and withdraw, leaving the sand smooth and untouched. I turned to her, a wild smile breaking across my face despite the blood and bruises. "Ready to finish it?" I asked. She laughed then, a fierce, ragged sound that split the quiet morning in half. "With you?" she said, her eyes burning bright. "Always." And as we stepped back into the half-destroyed cafe, side by side, I knew. We weren't just rebuilding a barrier. We were building a war cry the sea would never forget. Days bled into nights and nights into days, but I stopped counting. Time inside the cafe became its own tide, shifting, pulling, crashing in waves of chance and blood and salt. Sunrise brought new wounds to seal, new runes to carve, new sigils to hammer into the bones of the building. Mara and I moved like soldiers in a trench, our bodies stitched together by pain and a wild, defiant joy neither of us could name. We slept in shifts, always with one ear to the surf, listening for the next whisper from the deep. But the sea stayed silent. It watched. It waited. I could feel it every time I closed my eyes, the collector's echo drifting below the black waves, the other shapes shifting in the abyss, sniffing at the edges of this new line I had drawn. The ocean wasn't gone. It was merely learning, licking its wounds. And so were we. One morning, as the horizon split into gold and violet, Mara placed the final talisman above the doorway, a woven spiral of kelp, bone, and blood-soaked twine. The moment she'd pressed it into place, a shockwave pulsed through the floorboards, rattling the windows and sending dust raining from the rafters. We both stumbled, catching each other. Then, slowly, we looked around. The cafe had transformed. Salt runes glowed faintly along every wall, humming in time with our heartbeats. The floor was lined with new protective knots, twisted and blood-bonded to my spirit. Broken windows had been replaced with panes etched in ritual sigils that shimmered whenever the wind blew in from the sea. It no longer felt like a diner. It felt like a cathedral built to spite the waves. Mara turned to me, her eyes wide and glassy. "It's done," she whispered. "For now, it's done." I nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in my throat. I stepped forward and pressed my palm against the main doorway. The marks I had carved there, marks I didn't even remember making, as if they had flowed straight from the marrow of my bones, glowed bright as starlight. I felt the barrier pulse outward, rippling down the dunes and across the surf. The sea flinched, drawing back another inch. It was the first time in my life I had ever felt the ocean retreat. Mara's hand closed around my wrist, pulling me gently away. "Come," she said, her voice tender and steady. "Watch the sunrise with me." We stepped out onto the porch together. The dunes gleamed with dew, the sand untouched by the tide's claws for the first time in what felt like centuries. The wind smelled of salt and wildflowers, and the hush that settled over the water felt almost reverent. We sat side by side on the cracked wooden steps. For a long time, neither of us spoke. I let my head fall against Mara's shoulder. She looped her arm around me, pulling me in tight. Her warmth felt more protective than any rune I'd ever drawn. After a while, she let out a shaky breath. "Iris would have loved this view," she murmured. My lips twitched, a half smile breaking across my battered face. "She would have criticized the knots first," I croaked, my voice still sandpaper from screaming at storms. Mara snorted, her laugh slicing through the morning air like a blade. "She would have," she agreed, "but she would have been proud, so proud." We fell silent again. The sun crept higher, turning the waves into rolling fields of molten gold. My eyes traced the shifting line where the water met the shore. It looked like a scar, fresh, raw, beautiful. I closed my eyes and listened. Deep below, the ocean's pulse still throbbed. Slow, monstrous, infinite. It hadn't forgotten me. It never would. I pressed my palm to my chest, feeling the spiral scar beneath my skin flare faintly. It answered the sea's pulse with its own quiet thunder. "I'm not done," I whispered to the horizon. Mara turned to me, her brow furrowed. "I know," she said softly. "The sea will never stop, and neither will you." I looked at her, seeing every line, every shadow that war and grief had carved into her. She looked fragile in this light, human, breakable, but behind her eyes burned something vast and unstoppable. I reached out, cupping her face with a blood-streaked hand. "We fight together," I said. "We always will." She leaned into my touch, closing her eyes as tears slipped down her cheeks. "Always," she echoed. A hush settled over us, and for a moment, everything felt still, as though the world itself was holding its breath. Then, far out on the horizon, a single wave rose taller than the rest. It stood there, a silent monument, before it slowly crumbled back into the sea. A promise, a threat, a salute. I watched it, my fingers tightening against Mara's. "Let it come," I said, my voice strong and unyielding. "I'll be waiting." She turned her head, pressing her lips to my temple. "You are the storm now," she whispered against my skin, "and the shore, it finally has a soul fierce enough to match it." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I tilted my head back and let the rising sun wash over me, feeling every scar, every echo, every promise burned into my bones. Beyond the dunes, the sea watched me, and for the first time, it didn't see a sacrifice waiting to drown. It saw a rival. A new covenant, inked in blood and salt, standing tall on a dawn-soaked shore. I breathed in the scent of the tide, closed my eyes, and smiled. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the shore and beyond. This story was more than words on a page. It was a journey into the depths of grief, rage, power, and ultimately, rebirth. It's about fighting back against the things that haunt us, about standing when every wave tells you to sink, and about carving your own line in a world that wants to wash you away. To everyone who listened, who breathed every ragged breath with Amelia, who felt the salt sting your skin and the thunder crack your bones, thank you. You became part of this tide with me. This story is for the stubborn souls who refuse to be claimed, for the ones who have been told to break and instead chose to become the storm. I hope you carry her fire into your own nights, your own dark waters. May you always find the courage to roar back at the waves, to hold your own line, and to remind the world, in whatever darkness it hides, that you are still here. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider sharing it, leaving your thoughts in the comments, or simply carrying its echo forward. Your support keeps these stories alive, drifting beyond the horizon to find new hearts. Until the next tide, remember, you are the shore, you are the line, and sometimes you are the storm. Thank you for listening. See you in the next story.